And then across the town from us. He's across the city. So it's always. And then we made friends with people. But it is, it's the furthest thing from a school. As long as they have a form.
You can tell right away. You can tell right away.
Joni.
No?
Maybe it was on the second floor. Yeah.
No, it's so down.
Oh, no, why did you
Whiskey or Max? Call this meeting to order of the Monday, January 23rd, meeting of the Planning and Land Development Regulation Commission. My name is Stacy Eckert. I am currently serving as chair of the commission. We'll do a roll call real quick. I'm here. Alan Cook. Here. Anna Laziza.
Here.
Teresa Lane.
Here.
Robert Feather. Here. And Earl Farmer. Here. We got a full house. We're good. Are there any additions, deletions, or modifications of the proposed agenda? Take that as a no. And we have time set aside for public comments. There's a lot of folks here. There's two levels of public comment. One is for items that are not on the agenda, and one is for items that are on the agenda. So the agendas here, the agenda mostly tonight is a mandatory change to the land development code, and the other one is a proposed amendment to the comprehensive plan. I see a lot of folks that only have three cards filled out, so if you would like to participate by commenting, please make your way up to the front and fill out the comment card. The blue is for an agenda item, and the yellow is for non-agenda items. I have two yellow cards that I believe are probably agenda items. That is, I'll just check. Carrie Marshall for proposed change to Lake County Comprehensive Plan. That I assume that is an agenda item.
Yes, sir.
And then,
Blue card, sir?
that's fine. No, we'll do that. And Tim Taylor, same thing, agenda item, okay. And if you wish to make comment, please just fill out a card until you got your name written down. Are there any, is there anyone who would like to make a public comment on an item that is not on the agenda? Okay, we have minutes from the last time we met. Is it that long ago? June of 2022?
We thought we were retired, huh?
It's a period of time. Does anyone have any changes that they proposed to the minutes that were from the minutes meeting? If not, is there a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes?
I make a motion that we approve the previous minutes.
Second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. So the business of the commission tonight is a public hearing on two ordinances. Public hearing on ordinance number 2023-01. That is the first ordinance of the year, I guess. 2023-01, ordinance that will amend the city's comprehensive plan as mandated by an amendment to the Florida Constitution. Public hearing must be held, but all local governments have no choice but to adopt the wording proposed. So, Lee, you have some.
Just a few brief words, because quite frankly, you don't have any choice. The Florida Constitution was amended by the voters of the state, requiring that the section 10, the outline of the ordinance, be included in everybody's comprehensive plan, all 467 cities and 67 counties. So we have to adopt that before we can make any other change to a comprehensive plan that's proposed. Again, we have no choice, but we must hold a public hearing, and that's the purpose of the first item on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve it.
I have a motion to approve the ordinance, the mandatory limit from Robert Feather. A second on that.
I'll second it.
Anna? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None? Approved. So the next item on the agenda is a proposed public, we have a public hearing on ordinance number 2023-02. So the second ordinance of 2023. This is, according to the agenda, we got ordinance 2023-2 is an ordinance submitted by the property owner of the areas formerly known as the Auto Mall, just a signifier, and also known as Orange Camp Point Center Project. Current land use map and zoning are both employment center and do not allow for residential uses. The ordinance amends the city's comprehensive plan to allow 300 apartments and 152 townhomes on the property as part of the citizens' vision for the city of town the year 2035. There's a staff report which we'll discuss imminently for review of the project, and I believe there's also a financial analysis prepared by accountants that says what would be the financial ramifications of such change or such ordinance. The ordinance, should I read this out or is it up above?
The title?
Yes.
I don't know, it's not necessary to read the title at this point. It's only just, it has to be read by title before adoption.
All right. So, sir?
But if I could give an intro,
Okay, that'd be
to
good.
kind of help you bring us where we are, how we kind of got here, where we are. This property, is it here, that one has that map on it? Okay, there's a map right there. And the EC, from a historical perspective, the EC is originally was that green triangular area with the water in the middle, that area, and then a little bit of red down here at towards the bottom, right there. Yep. But when the city adopted its comprehensive plan, that was the original EC. That's the employment center. That area is, except the red area, the little triangle area, the green area, is my understanding that is part of the Victoria Park DRI. And pursuant to the DRI, that area has to be developed commercial. So one influenced the other. I don't know if the comprehensive plan, this all happened before I started representing the city. I don't know if the comprehensive plan influenced the DRI or the DRI influenced the comprehensive plan, but that's the area, the green area, when the EC was put there, the employment center land use was put on the property. That's the property that was analyzed and talked about, the green area and that little bit of red area. And then I think 2018-ish, somewhere in that time frame, the property owner proposed to the area below, the bigger area to the red that kind of goes to the left, wanted to do the auto mall. And they annexed into the city that red area. And before that, that was the unincorporated area of the county. So they petitioned to annex in that red area, and they asked, at the time they were going to do auto malls, the auto dealerships, and that was consistent with employment center, that was commercial. Employment center allows commercial. So the city was easy expansion of our employment center land use to incorporate that area that was originally, when our comp plan was originally done, that was the unincorporated area of the city. And then we did the ultimately rezoning that to a plan development, a development agreement, a site plan that allowed the auto mall development. I think this little point is important because I don't want y'all to think that all this property that we're talking about was analyzed and considered from a planning, long-term planning perspective to be commercial, and that this is proposing a change to it. Because really what the city looked at when they analyzed it was that green triangular piece and that little red piece. That's what was analyzed and looked at from a long-term planning perspective to make it commercial. The area we're talking about is the red area. So you got that little triangular piece, but the vast majority of that red area was not in the city. It was in the county, or was in the unincorporated area of the county. And it got the EC land use because the proposed development was commercial and auto. Well, COVID hit, and that had an impact on all commercial activity in our economy, including auto industry. And I think we're still seeing impacts on commercial employment center type use of, commercial businesses, commercial office space, those type of things have been impacted. So the property owner came and said, I would like to be able to offer residential there. And we said, well, can't do that. So what do we need to do to allow a residential use there? Now what's important is, what's being proposed is to add residential. We're not taking anything away. So the commercial uses are still a possibility. It's adding residential to that mix. We're not eliminating the possibility that could be commercial. We're just expanding the type. What's being proposed is an expansion of the uses that would be available. So there's really a three-step process, and my intent of this is to kind of, one, give you a history of how we got here briefly, and then let you know what we've outlined as our steps, assuming the commission moves forward. How will this play out, and what are the steps to ultimately get to where this project would be approved, and then make sure y'all understand what step we are at tonight. So how tonight fits in the whole picture. So the steps are, first, we need to amend our employment center land use to allow residential. That's step one. We have to allow that because we cannot approve any development that's inconsistent with our comprehensive plan. Right now, our comprehensive plan does not clearly allow, I don't think it allows it at all, but any residential. So we need to make it clear that residential is an allowed land use. That's step one. Step two is we have to amend a land development regulation to allow this type of residential development. We have to amend a current zoning category or create a new one, one or the other, that would allow this type of residential developments being contemplated. And then the last step is actually rezoning the property to the new residential development, or residential regulated plan unit development, land development zoning code provision. So this, what we outlined for us is, this is what's called a transmittal hearing, ultimately for the commission. Some types of comp plans can be what's called small scale amendments, can be approved rather quickly, but this type of text amendment has to go through a hearing where you have a transmittal. And it's called a transmittal hearing. After if it's approved, it gets sent to various agencies for review and comment. That takes a little while. So our thought is, if approved at transmittal hearing, while we're waiting for the comment to come back from these agencies, we will work on the land development regulation to create the zoning category, whether a new one or an existing one, that will accommodate the use and come up with a rezoning ordinance that would have an attached development agreement, a preliminary site plan, which you typically see in the PUD. The goal would be to bring those back to this body for review and recommendation. Then they would go to the city commission for a first reading. Then we would wait until we have our comments back on our transmittal to the agencies on this particular document that's before you tonight. And then we would finalize that based on the comments. And then all three would go to the city commission for second reading. First thing we would adopt is the item you're considering tonight is, do we amend our land use? If that passes, we go on to amending our land development regulations to create a zoning category that would accommodate the project. And then if that's approved, then we rezone, go to the rezoning ordinance and rezone it to that new land development regulation. And there will be staggered effective dates because they have to be they can't all take effect at the same time. They have to be dominoed because our comprehensive plan change, this one, even after adoption, second reading, doesn't take effect immediately. It starts to go back to the state in a period of time for objection. So there's a domino effect of when these can take effect. Or domino. So, but the intent is, and then ultimately it goes to the commission for second reading and approval, if it gets that way. I'm not saying it will, but I'm saying, assuming there's yeses to this process. The commission will have everything before it at the second reading, everything they need to approve before that, to this project at one meeting, and they'll consider all three of those things at one time. So that's the goal, that's how we kind of structured it if we have going through the approval process. Where we are at tonight is step one. We gotta amend the comprehensive plan to allow residential as requested. This is, you've probably heard discussed with this body, you've heard things about quasi-judicial hearings. This isn't a quasi-judicial hearing. This is a legislative action. This is policy setting. So you're not held to the higher standards of your action has to be supported by competent substantial evidence. The review here is policy, legislative setting. It's, as long as you don't abuse your discretion. So there's a lot of discretion to this body and the commission on approving policy changes on how they want to see the growth in this area. And that's where, and really the question is, do we want to allow residential in this part of the EC? And that's very important. What's been asked is that it would only be the red area of the employment center for residential. Residential would not be allowed anywhere else other than the red area. The remainder, because it's subject to the restriction in the proposal, is anything subject to the Victoria Park DRI would not have residential. And it's also setting a specific number of residential units, as opposed to so many units per acre within the entire EC. There's a certain number of units that they've asked for, and per their concepts, they would probably use all those up. So there would be no more if that occurred, there would be no more residential to put to the north. And even if we wanted to put residential to the north, yes, we could always amend our comp plan and our regulations to do that, but because it's controlled by the Victoria Park DRI, we don't have exclusive say over that. We would have to go through the process of amending the DRI, which would require the approval, I believe, of everybody who signed on the original DRI, which would include actually the land, the county, probably state agencies, maybe Department of Environmental Protection. So it's not putting residential in the green area on that map is possible, but very difficult. Not as easy as it is putting residential in the red area, because we have exclusive say over that. Whereas the rest of it, even if we wanted to, other people have to bless that as well. The other thing I think it's important, you may see renditions, you may have already received renditions. You're not approving a development tonight. The rendition is a concept of what they're looking at, but don't put too much weight into that rendition, because you're not approving the rendition. That could possibly be built, but they're not required to build it to that rendition. It's a rendition that would allow, based on the number of residential units, it could be built. But all that's gonna come forward, remember I talked about creating the land development regulation and then rezoning it with a development agreement and, PUD, development agreement, site plan. That's when you're approving the development. What you're approving here, what you're being asked to approve here tonight or recommend for approval, is the concept of allowing residential in this area of the DC only. That's really the concept, the question before you. And there's 3 decisions you can make. Obviously, you could support the request, make a recommendation to approve the request. You can also make a recommendation to deny the request. And there's also, you may say, some residential there might be okay, just not what they asked for. Maybe it could be less residential, or maybe you would want to see a mixture of residential and commercial. You want to require at least some commercial on this property, but allowing some residential would be okay. This is a planning recommendation. There's a lot more freedom here with the planning aspect of it, as opposed to when somebody comes in with a specific rezoning with a development plan. They don't have much discretion here. There is the discretion to work within the parameters of a yes and a no. There may be something in between that this body feels comfortable recommending. So you have those kind of options available to you. Trying to see if I just made some notes. Once you think I want to go over. I think that covers just about everything I wanted to touch on. Does anybody have any questions?
Scott, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Okay, as I understand it, from my experience with comp plan and so forth, going through the years, my understanding is when you did the comp plan, I didn't do it, but whoever did it, when you put a comp plan in like that, I had gone through it in this town with a certain situation I was in, and I was told that if I was to change to put what I wanted to put in, these people wanted to put in, I would have to change the comp plan. And they said you could not change things, and else you change the comp plan. Is that true?
That you cannot change things?
In other words, whatever we got into the comp plan right now, ABC, whatever it might be. Okay, if we want to change one of those things that's not conforming to the comp plan, we would have to change that part or one of the parts of the comp plan to make that change to be legal. Is that true?
Let me answer it the way, I'm not 100% sure I understand your question, but let me try to give you an answer.
Okay.
Your comp plan is required by state law, and it is some people refer to it as like the constitution for development within your jurisdiction. So you're going to have broad provisions typically in your comprehensive plan that control, I think they're objectives and policies and things like that. When you read it, you're gonna say, wow, that's not very specific usually. But they're goals that they have in your comp plan. Those goals then get implemented through your land development regulations. That's typically where you see your specificity come in. So if somebody wants to change the zoning, and this particular property is a good example, they say, we want to put residential on this property. And we say, well, you can't do it with the EC zoning, with your current zoning, we're going to have to rezone your property to something different, to what you want. And we say, okay, it would have to go to this zoning, or we have to create a zoning. Let's look at the land use, because we can't change the zoning if it's not consistent with the land use, with the comp plan. So we had to go back and look at our comp plan, and to accommodate the request, we need to change the comp plan, because the comp plan doesn't allow residential. Now, if the comp plan allowed residential, and it allowed the number of units that they were seeking, then we wouldn't be here talking about a comp plan. We would just be here dealing with the land development regulations and possibly just a rezoning issue. But in this particular case, the employment center land use does not provide for residential. Other than there's a reference to supporting uses or something like that, but when we look at the comp plan as a whole, it doesn't refer to residential being over. It actually talks about residential not being over. So I think when we look at everything together, I think without supporting uses being defined more clearly, which is what is being proposed, let's clearly say supporting uses could be residential. I wasn't comfortable making that broad of an interpretation of what supporting uses were, given the other language, the verbiage in the comp plan. So if we were just doing a rezoning, if your comprehensive plan was good, and there was a zoning category, we didn't have to amend our land development regulations at all, and we were just rezoning the property to allow what the comp plan allows, we would be having a quasi-judicial hearing right now. We would not be having a legislative hearing. The comp plan is legislative. Amending our land development regulations is legislative. Those are policy-setting issues. Once you put the policies in place that allow what the individual wants, now you're not policy setting anymore when you apply those regulations to an applicant. You're now in a quasi-judicial setting, and your decisions have to be supported by substantial competent evidence, for or against. So it's a step process, Cookie. Do we have to make policy changes to allow the development, or don't we? We don't. It's just a quasi-judicial hearing to allow it. But, so I'm not sure what you were told, what you're referring to. If I could just make it an example of this particular case, what they were asking for was not allowed in our comp plan, so we have to amend the comp plan. And that is a legislative policy.
There, and reading the comp plan stuff, that one of the biggest things in the comp plan that hits in the face is density. That's the big thing on our comp plan as far as density. Now, as far as I'm concerned, doing what we're about to do or whatever we're going to do here is density has a lot to do with this, because you're taking it out of a commercial piece of property and putting it into a possibility of having apartments and stuff. To me, okay, I'm just using my thing, that's the biggest thing with density. You weren't changing the density as much. With this item, it wouldn't bother me as much. But reading that comp plan, everything is density, density, density. And as far as I'm concerned, what we're planning on doing, or maybe doing, or whatever it might happen, density is the biggest thing. And when you start putting a bunch of people, 1,000 people in apartments, you know what I mean? Compared to a commercial piece of property, that's a big difference to me. Okay, so.
And it is a difference because, and typically when you talk about density, what you see is units per acre. How many units per acre is someone allowed to build? In this particular one, they're saying they're giving a specific number of units, not units per acre, because we have EC that goes in areas we don't want this to be built. And, you know, when this came up, we talked about the idea of creating a new land use or going to an existing residential land use. The problem was, we did not want this type of development coming on this side of I-4.
On this side.
This side of I-4. You know,
Okay,
it's pretty clear talking to people, I wasn't here when all this was done,
yes,
but that area where Auto Mall was planned and the property to the north, that was kind of envisioned always to be your high-intensity uses. And we have the I-4 as a buffer between those high-intensity uses and the rest of the county. It is generally, that's what I've kind of heard from people. And I agree, we do not allow enough in our city the type of residential density. I don't believe that's being contemplated on this project. I don't think we allow it. So that's why we're having, but the unique thing about this, and I'm not arguing for or against, it's the unique thing is you have the I-4 buffer between, so it's separated from the remaining part of the city. In terms of, when you think of commercial, residential, you talk about density. When you talk about commercial, you talk about intensity. It's like density is residential, intensity
yes.
is the commercial stuff.
I'm with you.
What was proposed, what can currently be built right there, you know, they're vested to build the automobile. So you always got to remember, you're not looking at vacant land versus what they want to build. You compare, what can they build under current regulations in terms of the use to what they want to do. And the existing entitlements that are on that property are pretty intense. I mean, you go back and you can look at that auto mall use, that was a pretty intense development for that property. So there was a lot of impacts that were going to be caused to the road, the infrastructures, the utilities. There were going to be impacts with what has already been approved. So whenever you look at a development, you never look at it from vacant land to what they're asking for. You look at it from what are they allowed to do now compared to what they're asking to do. So, but all those intensities, those still have to be, just because you say residential, say this goes through and it gets approved. Yes, you can have this many residential units. But whether or not you can actually get that many residential units, you still have to go through the concurrency evaluation. You may not be able to get them based on road impact analysis, based on water and sewer analysis. All that stuff has to be analyzed to make sure the infrastructure is in place to allow that. So that's part of the development review process. What we're just trying to say here is, kind of say, if they were able to meet all the development requirements, all the comprehensive concurrency requirements, would this use be okay? Is residential in this area as opposed to maybe an auto mall or in conjunction with commercial and residential, this is an option, like I said. Is it okay to insert some residential in this area?
No.
That's the policy.
Just a quick little joke. And that gentleman sitting down there below, when they were gonna put the auto mall in, it's, what do you think? I says, I love it. You know why? If the cars make too much noise, we just turn them off. And that's the end of the noise. Thank you. Appreciate it. I just wanted to bring my point out of where we're stepping.
Mr. Berman, said development, this was, if approved, would it cause any kind of ripple effect within the city?
Would it have a ripple effect in the city? No. That's because we are only amending the employment center land use, and the employment center land use can only be on that side of our corner.
Well, let me just, legally, no. Politically, yes.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Down the road, could it come back?
Somebody could make the argument, you approved it over there, why not approve it?
That's that's exactly.
But, yeah, you can do that. That can happen,
Yeah.
that can happen anytime. Yes.
I know it does happen many times, that's what I'm saying, if it says development get approved, what's gonna cause down the road?
To make changes down the road, and I think it's really important you understand that, to me, the policy setting, legislative action, quasi-judicial. To make changes on this side of I-4 that would allow the density that they're talking about on the Auto Mall, the Orange Camp side of I-4, you would have to make more legislative changes. And with legislative changes, you don't really have to justify no. You can say no. You know, you have a lot of discretion. As long as you don't abuse your discretion, you can say, you have a lot of leeway in how your local government is planned to grow. You don't have leeway once you set these regulations, and once you take the legislative action, and now you apply it to somebody who submits an application, it's much harder to say no. Because now you put the rules in place.
Right, okay.
So, yes, but anything is subject to change. You know, everything in the city is subject, nothing is firmly set in the city. So everything development-wise can change, but it takes a policy decision at that point in time. But just approving the EC on that side of I-4 does not mean that somebody has an entitlement or a right or legal argument that they should get it somewhere else. Do they have a political argument? Sure, but they can always have, you know, just that argument.
That's questions for Mr. Simpson. Attorney Simpson, the ordinance that was presented was, where was that? How was that? Who drafted that? It looks like it was a combination.
Well,
Back and forth.
probably it came from, I mean, it definitely was a combination of work, but with comments back and forth, but I think it came out of the applicant's lawyer's office.
Okay. And just to be clear, we're only talking about the land that's under the current, we'll call it the Auto Mall property, not the property that's part of Lake Allen, that's part of the Victoria Park DRI. And the DRI, Development Regional Impact, will take precedence, so to speak, over our comprehensive plan.
Correct. We were only talking about the auto mall, the thing that's, basically, the areas that are basically planned for the auto mall, that's the area we're talking about.
Lee, do you have something to add?
I just wanted to say, well, two things. I want to introduce the next speaker, but before I do that, I just want to elaborate a little bit on the role of the comp plan, and Scott has talked about it already, but very rarely do we discuss the comp plan in our routine day-to-day activities, because we deal with usually the zoning and those activities in land development regulations, and they all come after the comp plan. The comp plan is the foundation document, and it's really, I refer to as the vision statement of the citizens. It's how the citizens view this particular community, how they want to view the community in the year 2035. What will it look like, feel like, and act like in the year 2035? And so it's an extremely important document from that particular perspective. It just so happened that when the property was annexed in 2018, their use of the land was concurrent with the triangle that you saw above that, which was the EC. So it was an easy change for the comp plan at that time, just to take that EC and move it down to include this particular property. Now, to change this before you today is radically, well, I would call it radically different, because where no residential is allowed, they want to put in 452 units of residential living. And that is a significant change, and I think goes to the heart of the whole citizen vision of what they would like to have in their community. With that preamble, let me introduce John Patterson. Let me just say something. I think it's relatively humorous. As you know, I'm the city administrator. I'm also the city clerk and city treasurer. What else? But I'm also, the last one I want to mention is I'm the city planner, all by charter. And so the commission, the city commission had the wisdom to actually hire a real planner who will address you now. John Patterson is with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and he has analyzed the ordinance, and he has a PowerPoint presentation to show you. So let me just, without further ado, let him, it's okay, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman? Let him take over.
And then we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you. Just for again, John Patterson, Central Florida Regional Planning Council, are basically a kind of quasi governmental agency representing 9 counties and provide technical assistance to smaller communities such as yours for the most part. We larger ones too, but we tend to be smaller communities to provide assistance like this. We get complex issues that may be above a city's expertise, for example. So we can start the PowerPoint. Most of this I can actually just, I was going to look through it real quickly. So much of it was covered so eloquently by Scott. If I leave. The next screen. Okay, and as mentioned, this is the Lake Palm portion is about 3.64 acres. And it should be noted, and this is important, the language says that the residential uses are to be in support of commercial. That commercial does not have to be within the city of Lake Helen. That's what's happening here. The commercial is going to the land side of the property, just to the east. And to me, it brings up an important thing because one of the issues that I discussed is kind of a community like Lake Helen where there isn't imbalance between residential and commercial. That puts more of a tax burden on residents. Commercial is generally known to bring in more revenue, but take less in services. Taking much money out of your services. Okay, go please. And we've all seen that map. It's just a little area just to the left is the land portion, right in that area there. Yes, exactly. Right in that portion is where the commercial portion of the project would go. So in this case, we would get residential tax dollars, but not getting the impacts from the commercial. The land would get those. Next slide, please. And we've got the numbers here. We've just discussed those. We potentially could have not set the studies up tonight from 3 to 5 stories. We didn't ultimately height of the apartments, but that's still in here. There's nothing solid there. That's not really the issue tonight. Tonight's just the ability to eventually get the right to build residential on that property. Next slide, please. We'll go through some of these changes here. Basically, you have your table 2.2 or subsection 11.2.b, which is basically changes to the comp plan regarding acreages. There have been some annexations that were addressed in the comp plan. Making acreages, percentage of future land use within the city for the employment center, as well as adding the potential residential units within the district. Next slide. Also updating commercial land use district, the supporting land uses for commercial uses of the employment center district to including a mix of residential housing types and styles. And then under the third table here, actually where it's talking more of the density issues, they're talking about the initial proposal. It could go below but not above these numbers from 300 apartments. 150 townhouses, or 50 total units altogether. And it would be under planned development. Now, under planned development, what happens when you have a planned development zoning project? Density is not set as it is in other areas of the city. Density comes through eventually through a development agreement. We were discussing some of the density issues today with the units, but ultimately, that's what sets the density in stone. Next slide. Okay. And yeah, okay, that's gone ahead and provided the different ordinances, goals, objectives, and policies that should say the comprehensive plan that are this projected change would implement. And we agree with them there's one we came across, of course, because the city commission, it needed to be adjusted. Next slide. And that was, there's
under objective 1.1.12, future land use element talks about land use being in place for commercial development both east and west of the I-4 interchange. And if this were the case, you are taking some of that commercial away, the potential for that, possibly. It could be partially commercial, partially residential, but it is adding something new to the mix, which could potentially impact future commercial. Next slide, please. And that's what I was mentioning here. That was the one area of the comp plan that we had previously missed. It would have to have some language changed in the ordinance or added to the ordinance before going to commission to find this proposal in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. And the land development code has two sections. 13.20.01 and 13.20.02, where all the conditions have to be met. And in my staff report, I went further into that, but I found in my professional opinion as a planner, they were not met. And I have a slide coming up as a table that just basically shows you by number all the conditions, what category I felt was where they were lacking, and what category they fell under. And that's explained in full scale in the actual staff report you have. Just for brevity's purposes, I'm not going to go through those. You just have the table there that describes that. Next slide. And after that, please. There we go. That kind of goes through the different conditions and what areas. For example, there's areas that we're dealing with the density and the size of development, how it fits in with the area, impacts on infrastructure or services to the city, which could be things like police and fire, which was something I was concerned with, raised concerns about. Issues with the impact on the citizens, how it financially impacts as far as the millage rate and what the citizens pay as taxes versus comparing multifamily residential versus commercial development. And using basic academic knowledge on that, typically for commercials, cities that are more residential, lacking the commercial, that is often something being sought, add more commercial, so tax rates were not further, more people are paying into it, less burden on the residents. Next, please. Okay. And the last two, these were also two additional ones from the land development code that had to be met, which I felt were not meeting in those cases. I just brought those up to there. And explained it up here in the text, actual staff report, the reasons why. Next, please. Okay, we have for the number two was just the proposed comp plan amendment, not compliance with the comp plan for the one reason we mentioned that can be changed, but it's also more for the LDC regulations, those 10 conditions that were in there that were identifying concerns. And based on the fact that I felt that 3.20.01 and 3.20.02 were not being met, the recommended now. That means your question, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. So we're here from the attorney, Mr. Doan, for the owner of the property, Mr. Autumn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. It's been a long time to get to this phase, and I've been in front of many other citizens, planning board members, or commissioners now for 6 years on the Audible and its various shapes and forms. And A lot has changed in the world. A lot has changed on Orange Camp Road since we were last here. It was a 2-lane road, and construction hadn't even started on the widening. There was no roundabout. Victoria Gardens wasn't as big as it is today. Victoria Trails wasn't as big. Victoria Oaks didn't exist. A lot of the neighborhoods to the north of the employment center area that we're talking about here didn't exist. A lot of the neighborhoods up and down the MLK corridor, the Beersford extension was just a concept, not a reality. Now it's starting to be planned. Won't be long before it connects to Summit. Change continues to happen. It is inevitable, and it is often difficult to deal with, and we all do the best that we can to manage it in the ways that we can. And I think that your attorney did a good job of laying out what we are here doing today and what we are not here doing today. We are not here today asking you to give us permission to build any number of apartments or any number of townhomes, or where exactly they may go, or what they might look like, or what the roads are to get to them, or what they will be made out of or built out of, or how tall they are. We're talking about a very, very general comp plan change. And we're talking about it, and I think it's important that the attorney pointed out that when this first started and when the Automall project first started, and for that matter, when Lake Helen pre-existed I-4, of course, which is how we got this weird big triangle of land stuck out there off to the side. Right? And back in the late 90s, mid-90s, when they started talking about the concept of Victoria Park, and I'm sure some people in the room hear the word DRI, I don't even know what it stands for. It stands for Development of Regional Impact. Right? And that's one of the reasons I brought up all the things that have changed just in this last 7 years. It's not just a neighborhood, it's not just a PD, it's not just a subdivision. It's a development of regional impact. It has a whole code of the 4 statutes that talks about the way they're governed and the way they're planned and the way that they come together and the way that they're changed. And the big part of it is right in the name. When a project as large as Victoria Park comes to fruition, it's entitled, I believe, 4,700 homes for the maximum capacity. It's got the Victoria Park Village Center. It's got some offices and restaurants and shops. And then it had this green area that you see on the screen, and then just a little red tip. If you continue the green area down straight until you hit I-4, you have that. Lake Helen had no frontage on Orange Camp Road. There was no Lake Helen property. The red property, other than what would have continued straight down, was not Lake Helen. And originally, when we went to talk to Lake Helen and the land about the concept of the auto mall, we had a layout on the buildings which was such that if you continue that line straight down, it's going to cut a building right now. Didn't make any sense, didn't make a building small enough to just be on the Lake Helen side, and nobody wants a building cut in half by a city loop line. And so we had some talks with DeLand and said, well, let's move the Lake Helen line. Actually, we wanted to move it quite a bit farther over and capture about 6 buildings. DeLand said they didn't want to do it. They are the ones that control the water and the sewer. It's their utility service area. Therefore, they should be the only people that get to annex any of this land. We had very long conversations. Lake Helen officials had conversations. We said it's not really fair. Lake Helen desperately needs the commercial development. They're not going to get it up to the north ever unless this stuff down by Orange Camp Road develops, because there's no road, there's no utilities. This area, this red area in general, and that little part of gray that goes to Orange Camp, it's also part of this. That has to get built to give access to that area to the north, to that employment center. So we thought it made sense to at least get 3 or 4 buildings in. The land said no. And so we actually went ahead and filed an annexation working with Lake Helen to annex the entire thing in. Nothing in the land. 0%. 100% in Lake Helen. All 58. In the land suit Lake Helen. And Mr. Hurley and I4 Automall LLC paid for the defense of Lake Helen in that lawsuit. And we fought over it. And what we had originally proposed was about 10 acres in Lake Helen. Would have been willing to take 5 or 6, just not cut a building in half. But instead, we said, fine, we'll take 50. And ultimately, the compromise was we got 36. Right? So, and it was referred to a lot, during that process along the time as bonus land, right? It was land that was not previously part of Lake Elm, was never planned to be until this development came along and we annexed it. Obviously, fast forward, a lot of things changed in 2020. At a time in 2016, 15, 16, 17, when this was being pursued, dealerships were taking away the rights for dealerships, the dealership owners across the country because they weren't taking enough inventory. Take more inventory, take more inventory. Dealerships in the land were renting lots off-site to store vehicles because if they didn't take the inventory from the manufacturer, they got their dealership threatened to be taken out. So the concept was, one, get out by the interstate, get that frontage, just like you see at the Daytona Auto Mall, right? Get that exposure, that advertising, free advertising. But also the concept was go up. We didn't have the dirt here to hold the inventory. So as you know, what is currently entitled today, what can be built today, no planning board approval necessary, no city commission approval necessary. It's already been approved. Because we can build about 144,000 square feet of air-conditioned dealership space on the property we're talking about today. And they can be 80 feet tall with parking garages on top. That's allowed today. We don't need to go get permission. It's already been voted on. It already happened, right? So we're not talking about the difference of do we want to allow residential versus the trees and the grass that are there right now. We're talking about right now when it's entitled. And the auto mall is never going to happen, right? So essentially right now, until something changes, nothing will ever be built on that 36 acres in Lake Elm that's in the city, period. It's the only thing that's allowed in the land development. So if anything's ever going to be built, there has to be a change of some kind. Now, what the market has told us over the last 6 years is that this area can't sustain a 50-acre commercial development. It won't happen. For context, go down the road, go down Orange Camp to the public shopping center. You're facing that public shopping center, you got the road that goes to Chick-fil-A off to the left, then you go all the way to Orange Camp Road. So you have all those out parcels, you've got Kiki's, you've got the haircut place, the smoothie place, you've got the Publix building. That's 25 acres, right? And it's taken 7-8 years for it to get built out on 1792, with twice the commercial traffic count that Orange Camp Road has at I-4. Right? Because for commercial real estate, they don't count I-4 as traffic. It's the local, it's the county's traffic. So when a Panera or whatever is looking, they look at the traffic count. So we could say, for example, say, you know what, we don't want a land use change, we're gonna keep it commercial. Let's just take all the uses that are allowed on the 16, 17 acres that are the land side. Let's just expand that. So instead of auto dealerships, we can have restaurants, retail, offices. Let's just do that, and then we can have commercial. Well, what are you realistically looking at in the market when you do that? Down the road, where there's a lot more traffic, it's taken 8 years to fill up half of that. And it's barbershops, Chinese takeout, right? Those kind of things. The kind of things you probably won't even get that the farther you get away from frontage roads. Remember, Studer Road has to go away as part of this. So when it gets built, frontage road, which is the little curvy gray section you see going up, that'll be the access point. So you end up with a thing where unless you had destination retail, like the auto, right? There's nothing like it within 30 miles. So people will come to it because of that. And so they have no choice but to drive back in there to get to the auto mall. If you had something maybe like a super Target, right? Or a super Walmart, you could probably, destination retail would probably be saleable. But the traffic on Orange Camp Road won't allow that. That's way too much traffic. The traffic count blows out of the water. We couldn't do it. It wouldn't be possible. So what will the market bear? Well, we know because the only people who want to go under contract for anything that's potentially feasible out there is multifamily in town. Right? Now let's talk about a couple things on that real quick. Cookie, I couldn't agree with you more, right? Density is always the word of the day. Density in the wrong spot is awful. But density is not always the enemy. Sometimes density is the enemy of the things we fear the most and don't want in good planning. Density is the enemy of urban sprawl, for example. Density is the enemy of traffic counts if the density is providing a place to live next to a workplace, like this example, if it's providing a place to live next to your commuter route, like I-4, right? If the apartment is 2 miles off of the interstate, then the person who goes to work every day puts 4 miles of trips on the road to get to the interstate just to go where they're going. As opposed to if they're a quarter mile away, they get on the interstate and they go. I think the one thing everybody's so far been able to agree on in this project is that everybody desperately wants a convenience store at that corner of Forest Camp and Frontage Road. It's about the only agreement I've had long-term from anybody on this one. But density is not always the enemy. Density is the enemy of sprawl. It is the friend of green space. Because if you can house 300 units on 10 acres, instead of spreading them out on 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 foot wide lots, single family homes, that's typically the enemy or the friend of urban sprawl. Right? So here we've got the multifamily use, which also, let's not talk anecdotally when we have a specific piece of dirt. It is true, anecdotally, single family homes compared to commercial is a loser for a city. You barely get enough tax revenue to pay for the municipal services, for utilities, for fire, for police. You barely get enough out of your taxes to pay for it. Especially if you have some lower value properties and you've got homestead exemptions on top of it, veteran exemptions on top of it, widow exemptions on top of it, all the exemptions we have, you all know too well, your city's plagued by, right? There are no homestead exemptions on the multifamily. There is a lot of value in that. And I'm going to say this as kindly as I can. Now, in your staff report, if you go through and look on the items of whether or not this complies with the comp plan, the staff, the contract planner says yes on every single element, except one. I'm going to address that. The other ones are whether or not, and you go through these 9 factors in your land development code of things to consider when contemplating recommending approval, or ultimately it'll be the commission who decides whether or not to approve. Things to consider, but it is not a you must check all 9 of these boxes to move on. It is these are the factors you should consider when weighing the pros versus the cons. Those, I suspect, were mostly written by your city administrator, who, as he said, is the administrator, the clerk, the treasurer, the planner. But he's not the president or the czar of Lake Helen, right? The people elect the city commission to ultimately make those decisions. The city commission was curious enough about this possibility that in April of 2021, we held a workshop. And we said, look, this is kind of what we're thinking right now. The almost not going to happen. Here's a general idea. Do you want us to even waste your city staff's time in looking at this or not? If you don't, if you have no interest, tell us to get out and we won't even send an application. They said, do it. We may say no, but do it. It's worth considering. We need to evaluate our options. Right? So we tried for the last almost 2 years to get here today. But we were told for a while that the application was lost. We must not have submitted it despite the checks being cashed. We were told multiple times that the application was incomplete. We do this every now and then, and in fact, of course, we did this with the annexation of the comp plan change, of the land use change, the zoning change last time. But we had to fight through a lot of that. And thankfully, Mr. Simpson has been very helpful in helping move us along, especially after we had to have another meeting after requesting it for about a year. And finally sat down and the mayor helped and said, yeah, well, why haven't you come forward? We said, we've been trying. So here we are. So thank you. We're here. What are we asking for? We're asking for the possibility to consider a change that would allow a zoning application and a development agreement to allow residential downtown. Your commission thought enough about wanting to see it that they agreed to pay, I believe, up to $15,000, I think, for an economic study to say what would it look like. That report came out late last week. Debunked a lot of what was in these staff comments about, oh, well, it's just going to be too expensive. I guess we can't afford this project. Well, the consultant that the city hired, that I believe also does the city's auditing and everything else, pretty familiar with the city's financing, said, not only will you be able to bear it, but when this is built out, you'll be looking at a net $550,000 a year of revenue. Net, not gross, net. after expenses, after purchase. And that's unencumbered revenue. That's not counting the impact fees that'll come in to help pay for new police cars and things like that. All those expenses have been considered in that report. All will be paid for and more, $300-some thousand for capital improvements included. Right? I said we don't want to talk about the anecdotal when we have a specific site. I'm talking about that multifamily. Multifamily is, for all practical purposes, from a tax base perspective, just about the same thing as commercial. Especially in a site like this where Lake Helen doesn't have to run 1 inch of sewer line, 1 inch of water line, does not have to build 1 linear foot of roadway, doesn't have to do any of those things, will have to provide police services, possibly in an interlocal agreement with lands, the boundaries right there together, but would have to provide that. But the density that allows that value, what we're talking about, according to your city's expert report, is a $90 million increase to the tax rolls as far as taxable value of property compared to the vacant lands. So it's something to be considered. It may be that at the end of the day, you all or the commission say, well, it would be nice. That would certainly allow us to have any chance of paying the debt service on the $13 million bond that's being recommended to the city for much needed infrastructure. It would be nice to have that option, because I'm not sure that there's a couple $100 extra $1,000 laying around right now in this tax increase. So it would be nice to have that option. And that's what we're asking for today at this phase, options. Is it possible to allow residential on some dirt that was not part of the comp plan when the policy was written that said only commercial east of I-5? This did not exist as part of Lake Helen when that policy was written. So the only part that the planning agency said doesn't comply with the comp plan was a part that was written before this dirt was part of the city of Lake Helen. So let's start with that one. And that is objective 1.14. You have to break it down into a couple of parts. One I just mentioned, commercial development west of I-4. We're not taking away any opportunity for commercial development west of I-4. We're adding the possibility of residential, as your attorney said. We are not taking away anything. This is only an add, not a takeaway. Okay. The second part, it would allow exclusive residential development within the properties west of I-4 within the Orange Camp Point project. Would not mandate it, right? Is it possible with the layout that we proposed? It'll all depend on engineering. That's a step down the road. If the mix isn't right, if the market study says, you know what, we don't think the market will support 300 apartment units. These are maximums that we're asking for. Not it'll happen. These are maximums under the comp plan. There could be no more than 300. There could be no more than 152. It could be that if this were amended to allow those, that when we come forward back in the development agreement and say, well, this is how we would put those 300 and 152, you may say, the commission may say, no, that's too much. Now that we've seen the engineering, we've seen the stormwater, we don't see enough open space, we don't see enough bike paths, we don't see enough park area. Nope, not gonna do it. Okay, it was a cap. It was never a, you must build it, it's a cap. So that's what I want to say. Is it possible that we could come back to the plan that shows 300 apartment units, 102 townhomes, and there's no room for commercial like on the side right there? It's possible. It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that if that happens and this road is built up to the Stuart Howard property, then finally after 25 years, somebody starts to look at that employment center workplace for Victoria Park and considers building it. They're not going to right now. Certainly not with the decreased demand in commercial office parks, right? They're not going to go to one of the hardest places to build. It's wet, it doesn't have a road, it doesn't have utilities. You can have one of those things, but it can't have all of those things. Right now, it's a very unattractive top of the road. If this project goes forward, the road goes all the way up with utility connections, it becomes a lot more attractive. So it may not be commercial here, but again, a 300 unit apartment complex from a tax perspective. And this may be something that the city commission wants to have James Moore look at further. Compare that usage of that acreage versus an out parcel with a McDonald's, a Burger King, and something else you would see at a Michael Interstate exit, right? And that also changes the complexion. This is another part of the commercial side. These two sides, the commercial side and the residential side, the land side, like, they don't exist independently of each other. If there's no rooftops right there up against this property, it's gonna change the nature of what goes in commercially. Pretty easy, C-store on the hard corner, frontage road, Orange Campus gonna have a convenience store with gas. That was a no-brainer. Beyond that, what goes next to it? Is it the kind of place where you go in and have your order taken at the table, or is it a McDonald's? Well, is it just an interstate exit, or is it a neighborhood? That'll dictate what kind of commercial development goes in. Right. The third point, the reason saying, since they're under separate ownership, there's no guarantee that future development of lands to the north would be developed as commercial uses. Well, they can't be developed as anything else for the reasons your lawyer laid out. It's part of the DRI that Lake Helen and DeLand and Victoria Park were all a party to from Stuart Howard. Unless everybody signs on to change that to residential, it can't, right? This amendment wouldn't allow it to go all the way up there anyway, because it geographically restricts it right here. And you're putting a total cap. There's a reason for that total cap, right? A couple of the things we did when we built in the nature of this application were with what we've learned from working with Lake Helen for the last 8 years and 10 years ago. And I'm no dummy about the nature of small town stuff either, having grown up in between a town of 8,000 and 2,000. Right? My wife's from a town of 400. I think Lake Helen's small, I got some partners here in Illinois. I get it. And I also live closer to this site than a lot of people in Lake Helen do. So I get it, and I care about what goes out here too. The cap is there for a reason, right? If we say 300 units, or we said 18 units per acre, that applies to all of EC, right? So we can really pack density on because the denominator is the entire EC. What we've said is, no matter what, doesn't matter where you put it, you can't have more than this, period. Doesn't matter how you cut it up, how you try to do the math, how you wiggle property lines around. It can never be more than this. That's the reason we're proposing a cap on the number of units. Engineering may not allow it. We can never go over that. We may not achieve that number, but it can never go over that for all of BC. So if we were to build that, even if Lake Helen, DeLand, the Stuart Howard family, everybody else said, okay, the residential restriction is off. We're taking that out of the DRI. We're allowing it in the terms of the DRI. Your comp plan still wouldn't allow it because this amendment would put a cap on it. Right? Somebody would have to come back and get permission from the comp plan. So yes, it's true. It's no guarantee that somebody may come along and actually develop the employment center. But let's contemplate it the way it stands today. No road, no utilities, no place for any employees to eat or live nearby without driving several miles to do it, except for the couple spots in the Victoria Park Village Center. Versus if there were a road and there were utilities and there were apartments there or townhomes there for the workforce to do the live, eat, work, play development that we see become so popular because it's good planning. So the only place that the planners have said it doesn't comply with the comp plan, I don't believe for valid reasons. And especially the part about absolutely absolutely only commercial on the west side of I-4 when this wasn't even part of Lake Helen's boundary. All the other parts, the transportation element, the future land use element, the housing element, all parts of the housing element, the public facility element, conservation element, the recreation element, the capital improvement element, the intergovernmental coordination element, all of them comply. That's per your statute. When you go further into the code section 132001 requirements, this is the next section of the staff report. Now, this is the part that's just in your land development regulations that says the commission shall consider all of these factors when considering a project. It doesn't say you have to meet them all. It says these are the things you should be thinking about. And then it goes on to say whether or not it's there. And I presume Mr. Becker is. Requested uses are compatible with existing or planned uses in the surrounding area. Staff finding. It's not compatible because there's no apartments nearby. Well, let's just think about that one for a minute. If that were the criteria, then we would just only see little cluster of apartments, little islands of apartments in communities. There would never be apartments mixed in with single family. There would never be apartments in commercial highway zoning, which we know not to be the case because just about every B4, C4 classification, including the B4 county zoning that was on a big section of this property before we changed it, that allowed multifamily development, right? It allowed up to 16 units per acre previously. That was already entitled here before. We didn't include it in what got approved as the Outlaw because we didn't think we needed it at the time, but that is a typical use, especially in this kind of area, again, where density is supposed to live. There are places for density, and in a community like ours, where we don't have big downtown or high-rise apartments, you put density next to the major transportation corridors. It overall reduces traffic on local road networks, consolidates utilities, you put density where it should live and where it should be smart. Right? It's also a little bit inaccurate in that there is actually townhome density in Victoria Park and Victoria Commons. It's actually quite a bit. Helps transition, again, transitory, right? Commercial, high density, single family, right? Having those all together is a transition to complementary use to each other. Staff finding, will approval of request be consistent with population density pattern? This is number 3. By the way, first, I skipped over number 1. Is it consistent with the comp plan? The planner already said it is. Every single category is consistent with the comp plan except the one that we addressed. So why there's a different finding in this LDC portion of that? 2, I addressed. Number 3, will be consistent with the population density pattern, not place an undue burden on existing transportation or other services, utilities, and facilities will be capable of adequately being served by them. Let's break that down. Staff says it will place an undue burden on city and county services. The land is serving the water and utilities here, it's provided, not Lake Elm. There is no burden on the Lake Elm Utility Department. The only thing you have to do is collect the royalties. That's it. So there's the accounting expense because you can add a fee to what the land charges. It's there in your city limits. There's no county expense. By the way, the financial report didn't take that into account. So there's actually more money coming in. I don't know how much. Could be $10, could be 10,000. I don't know. But it's not accounted for in the economic report, and you can charge us.
Could I ask a question, Mr. Chairman? Sure. So it's my understanding the capacity would be for up to 1,000 residents, right?
So the capacity calculation on the engineering side is basically by fixture, right? So right now, we have a general statement from land utilities that their sewer and water system can handle this overall, right? But then it'll come down to, again, at a much later state, let's say if the land use is approved and we're going for a zoning development agreement to actually get a certain number of units approved, we would have to go to the utility provider and say, this many bathrooms, this many showers, this many sinks.
That's my question.
Right.
Is that, have you gotten assurances or agreement with the city to provide sewer and water for
So
1,000 residents?
We have
this number of units that you're asking.
correct. We have the general, yes, there's capacity, but we can't submit a request and get vested to have a right to build that until we actually have a right to build it, right? We're not even allowed to build residential right now.
So you don't have the capacity reserved, do you?
It's
So
impossible to
whoever
have.
first come, first served, gonna get the capacity.
It is technically first come, first served. No one can have a reservation unless they have a zoning right in the entitlement. And we don't have a zoning right. So that reservation point would kick in at the time. So if we end up coming back before you 2 months from now with the PD amendment, we would at that point have a letter from the land utilities saying this number of units we have capacity. And if the zoning got approved, at that point we would be vested in the system. But it's impossible before that legally.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so you're saying there's no city staff to get involved in anything across the bridge?
Well, I'm sorry.
Any city staff, you're saying that everything's going to be, Lee, is this going to have a problem with any of our services?
I'm sorry, I have trouble hearing with the mass.
Our services, the city crew, are we going to service that across the bridge?
For utilities,
Yes,
No.
not utilities, as far as the parks and rec, the roads and stuff like that.
we will supply parks and recreation services to the residents, as we do to all the residents. The roads they indicate will be private, but of course that's subject to change. And therefore, we calculated no cost for roads. Utilities are served by the land. Developers pay for the infrastructure for utilities, not the city.
Police department as far as the city.
I'm sorry.
The police department and the city
The
group.
police department is ours, and it will have to serve, we've calculated 3 officers additional needed for that particular service. I think we're conservative, it could be more. Fire will be responsible, that'll be paid for by assessment, and we've already checked to make sure that we can have 2 separate districts. So the fire demand and services required by this particular development will not impinge on the cost of citizens of the remainder of Lake County. So, we will have to supply both fire and water, but,
So we'll have some effect on our
I'm
staff.
sorry.
Yeah, we'll have some effect on our staff. That's what we're getting at.
Oh, yes.
Compared to right now, what is entitled is fire services that have to service 80-foot tall auto facilities with auto garages and oil and gasoline and all of those things, and the police services that have to serve all those things as well. So we're not comparing it to servicing the empty woods, we're comparing it to what's already entitled and what this change would do. So that's one important factor to always keep in mind too. There are entitlements on this land currently, and it is already in the city limits of Lake Helen. So we're not talking about adding jurisdiction to Lake Helen. We're obviously talking about this would change the nature of what is allowed to be built there. But right now, fire trucks would have to put out a fire if there were, if the automobile got built, they'd have to put out a fire in 80-foot building. That all is part of the process that we will have to go through at a next stage down the road if we want to seek a development agreement. One of the things we have to do is meet, it's called a development review committee or a technical review committee, depends which city calls it what. We do it jointly by agreement under the existing automobile agreement between the land and Lake Helen and the county in this instance because of fire services. But one of the things we would have to say is one of the things they would look at when we propose a layout and say, we want to put these apartment buildings here, this is where we want to put the roads, this is where we want to put the fire hydrants. That's one of the things that they weigh in on at that phase and say, we're not signing off on this development unless we have verified that we have the fire capacity, we verify that we have the right hydrant placement, we verify that we have the right level of road access, unimpeded. Those are all part of the process. We went through it before to build the automobile site, get that concept approved, and we would have to go through it again before this would ever move forward.
I just have something to say about it, and that is that after being in town for 34 years, been on commission, involved with the city on a lot of things. All we worked for all these years, and that is we need some commercial property up our tax rates and do things. After a while, as a citizen, okay, I'm speaking for myself, not the board, but myself. And that is, after all these years, when that gentleman sitting over there said he was gonna put an automobile in here, you don't know how excited, believe me, how many people in this town was excited because we were getting our commercial park, which would take care of a lot of the taxes and everything else. So we were very excited about it and everything else. And as we go along, everything seemed to be going along, but as business goes, I've been in business 60 years. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. But I just wanted to explain how we were so excited about what you were gonna do and everything is there. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't happen. So we figured, well, the land's gonna have hotel, the land's gonna have this and stuff. We should be able to get some kind of commercial property in there that we can move forward and do taxable. Even if it wasn't the whole thing at one time, at least we get some commercial in there and go on. Now, why would this, now I said gentlemen, did you hear that? And I said, as he says, yes, there can be the two of them if it was done right. But the way this, I wasn't involved in the comp plan, so you can't blame me for that. But anyhow, the way the comp plan reads, It's not making it any easier to make this thing work. And my thing is, what are we gonna do to make it work? And that's my question.
So, question number 5, element number 5, proposed change consistent with the established land use pattern of not create an isolated district unrelated to adjacent nearby districts. Staff report, see response to number 2, which says there's no apartments nearby. I call this one a little bit, and I mean this from an academic and planning perspective, that comment's a little bit absurd. For the reason that we just talked about, this is right next to and surrounded by on 2 sides the Victoria Park development of regional impact, which has 4,177 dwelling units, and just to the north, right? Let's keep in mind this too, and I know a lot of Victoria Gardens residents don't realize this because whatever their salespeople didn't tell them, they didn't do their homework before they bought. But that green area has entitlements on it. There is a land use entitlement, there's a density entitlement there already. How dense do you think it is? 100,000 square feet of commercial? 200,000? 3? 4? 5? Keep going. It is entitled for 775,000 square feet of commercial development and buildings 80 feet tall. The setback requirement between commercial and residential, some of those residences go right up to the line, is about 50 feet. About 50 or 60 feet. That's how far set back the commercial development has to be from the houses that exist. That's done. That's approved. Nobody has to vote on it. Right? That's already in place. Right? That's already there. You know what? I forgot to put the number in there, but it's something crazy. I want to say it's somewhere along the range of about 7,000 parking spaces are included in the entitlements to serve that area. So when we talk about density and intensity, this has been planned as part of that 2035 vision plan, as part of the DRI that Lake Helen signed off for and said, yeah, we're up for this. We know what might happen. We're hopeful, in fact, that this will lead to the development of this employment center. This little bit of space that we have at the time, just a little bit of space west of I-4, now a lot more. We're hopeful that this is going to lead to a very intense development on the west side of I-4. We're not asking for densities that are abnormal for multifamily and townhomes. We're asking for very standard densities for multifamily and townhomes in an area that is incredibly dense by design and plan and has already been approved to be dense by design and plan. The intensity of what we already have approved with the Albemarle use, the traffic generation for the Albemarle use is 2.5 or 3 times higher than if the maximum number of townhomes and apartments were built out. It's 3.5 times higher. So this is not, is it intense compared to a field? Yes, of course, right? Anything is compared to that. But is it intense compared to what's already entitled? No, this is effectively a down zoning if, not a zoning because it's land use, but if ultimately we come back and have to change the zoning to use mostly residential or some residential in here, any addition of residential to this compared to the Albemarle will be a overall less intense, less dense use than what is currently. That's, I think, important to point that out because, as we mentioned before, density is important. This is not more dense. It's not more intense. It's less. Not to mention the effect it will have on taking trips off the road. Nobody who would live in these apartments or townhomes currently lives closer to getting on I-4 than they will if they live there. Sure, right? But it's not going to add any miles to the road. They already live somewhere, and they already drive from where they live to the grocery store and get to work and everything else. It's not going to add trips to the road, right? And sometimes these things are counterintuitive. Right now, there's a tentative proposal to put a Publix at the corner of Kepler and 44. And I want to bring this up for an example because one of the first things I hear when people hear that is, oh my gosh, the traffic at that intersection, it's already so bad, this will only make it worse. Will it? This is where things are a little counterintuitive. Right now, there are about 1,500 trips a day that drive through that intersection, either on their way to the Publix on ISB or on their way to the Publix on Orange Camp. And now they're cutting that trip in half or more to go to the grocery store right there. it will actually take tens of thousands of miles of trips off the road network every year. So sometimes these things are a little bit counterintuitive. That doesn't mean we can't have a valid opinion of I don't want Publix there, so we can believe that, right? But there's opinions and there's facts, right? And the fact is, people that will live in these apartments already live somewhere. The apartments, and there's another element, I'll just jump to it. Is there a need in the neighborhood or community for apartments? A mile and a half away, the Integra apartments that were built on MLK filled up faster than any Integra project in 10 years. It was to full occupancy within something ridiculous like 9 months. Usually they have like a 2-year or 2.5-year ramp-up rate. It was full in 9 months. Because that's how desperate the area is for nice rental apartments and nice units. So, is there a neighborhood need? The market says there is, otherwise people wouldn't be willing to spend millions of dollars to build. Proposed change will be compatible with improvements or development adjacent properties. We just covered that one. Now, this is the most ridiculous one, especially in light of the economic study that just came out, number 8. In the current economic climate, developer of a project rating, but staff finds that this change would be detrimental to the economic interests of the citizens of Lake Helen, who would be stuck with continued high millage rate and thus high taxes. And I would love to hear an explanation of this one in light of the economic report that the city made.
Any private school will teach you that.
In the first year, in the first year, your economic consultant that does your finances and does your audit and knows where your expenses are and where your revenues are. Your economic consultant said in the first year, there will be a net positive, and this is just on unencumbered funds. Doesn't count the hundreds of thousands of dollars in permit fees and impact fees. Just property tax and revenue unencumbered. $123,000 net impact in year 1. $285,000 net positive in year 2. $447,000 in year 3, $496,000 in year 4, $511,000 a year in year 5. That's a year of net benefit after expenses. We are not here to talk about the zoning part, right? But obviously the commission wanted to know what this kind of change might have an impact down the road, and that's what the economic professionals who do your books for you in the city said would be the economic impact. So to say that it will have a burden on the millage rate, I think it will, but I can't see how it would possibly go up. Not with $500,000 extra of net revenue after year 5. So this isn't about approving those apartments today, but it is about giving the commission the opportunity to consider a project that would have that sort of economic impact on the community. Again, as I understand it, there's a proposal for upwards of $10 million long-term bond obligation that's going to suck up a couple $100,000 a year of interest and principal payments to make some necessary improvements. And this is a source of revenue, not maybe one day, sometime 10 years from now, something might get built. This would be a real possibility, real flexibility for the near future. Number 9, substantial reasons exist why a reasonable use of property can't be accomplished under existing zoning. Yeah, it's not allowed. Pretty easy. And certainly you wouldn't want it on the other side. And that's actually one of the things early on that Mr. Simpson had suggested to me is, well, why don't we change one of the existing categories? And I said, because there's the domino effect, right? What effect might this have on the other side of the road? Well, EC is the only one that's only west of I-4, right? So let's keep it in EC. Or create another one for EC, but I don't see the point in creating another one when one of the routes is fine if they're limited. But also down the road, we won't likely be considering changing another one unless there's a language in it that says, certain density only allowed on the west side. But it is, I know, very critical to Lake Helen. I know it's critical to you all's opinion and to the commission's opinion and to the residents' opinion that nothing like this ever go on the other side. I don't think there will ever be in the foreseeable future, decades down the road, long before all of us are gone. Lake Helen would never approve a project like this kind of density of apartments on this side of I-4. Never. And we would never ask for it, and we would never propose a structure where it's even possible. And it also
Why us?
And it also wouldn't be practical on the road network, the water network, and the sewer network. Right? So that's why structurally, we're talking about EC, completely on I-4, and down the road, we'll be talking about a new zoning category that's called like a mixed use west of I-4 PD zoning. Because EC PD zoning also only technically allows. And actually, I think maybe what we landed on is we could modify the EC PD zoning. Again, because it only applies on this side. So, yeah, it can't happen on the west side, and it never should. For a lot of reasons, it can't. Roads, for one. But for a lot of utilities, for another. Many, many things would have to change in the infrastructure for it ever to even be feasible, but none of this would allow it. There's no slippery slope. There's no backdoor. This notion of, well, if you approve this one, somebody can just say you approved it over there. Yeah, for good reason. It's not on this side of I-4. It's on the other side, where the land can provide the utilities, where it's shielded with that kind of density, where it belongs, not on this side. And so that, it can't happen and it shouldn't happen on the other side. So going through, as a whole, again, very important to understand why we are here and why we are not here. Whether this commission votes to recommend approval, or recommends denial, or recommends approval with conditions, if the applicant agrees to the conditions, it will go on to the city commission next, right? And they will take your advice into consideration on whether or not it makes sense, right? The presentation I make there will be largely the same one here unless the staff report changes. But right now, today is about options, right? Whether or not you say yes or no, right, just procedurally, and it's just the fact of the way the procedure works, it'll still go on with the commission, we'll have this discussion again. And if the commission says, no, we're not gonna do that, we just, whatever reason, which is a matter of policy, we don't want any residents, it's not one, not two, then let's get into the conversation. But this is about options, this is about the chance to have that consideration. You've got your economic report, which I think helps paint that bigger picture of what possibly could be coming down the road. And we know from an economic standpoint, listen, if there were somebody willing to build Long tomorrow, it would be built. We wouldn't be. By the way, the one comment in here about people profiting, yeah, that's what people do when they sell their land typically. I can tell you this, Mr. Early gets every possible penny, and everybody that buys this dirt, if they overpay by 50%, he's still going to have lost a significant amount of money on this project. The dream to build the auto mall was a long road. It was an expensive road, litigation with the land, carrying the taxes and the insurance on this property for 7 years. It's not a sob story, but I'm just telling you, one, it's a little bit unusual to see that in a staff comment, that someone might make money if we make this change. Is the reason staff shouldn't support it? I haven't seen that before. I don't think we're supposed to be opposed to people getting a return on their investment in America.
The expensive residents we are.
I didn't interrupt you, Mr. Patterson.
I'm sorry, I was making a response.
Well, apology accepted. I didn't interrupt you.
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
But this is about possibility. It's about opportunity. This is what the market is asking for. This is who the buyers are. This is what it would look like economically if we have the chance to explore it further. And keep in mind too, and I think your attorney said it, but I know all these things, when it's not human nature, you don't do it every day, it can be a little bit lost in the work, right? Even if the comp plan amendment were approved, you approve it, the commission approves it, it goes up to the state approves it, it comes back down, we're gonna have to come forward with an amended PD that says, all right, now in our PD, maybe we'll say, we want to take full advantage of that maximum 300 units and maximum 152 townhomes. Maybe we'll know by then we can't build that much. Or the people that want to buy it can't build that much and don't want to. Maybe, but it won't be more than that, right? It can't be. And at that point, you may say, you know what? Not here. I don't like that. If you got rid of this one building and did a little pocket park for that community, so we don't have the burden on our Parks and Rec in the center of town, maybe, right? That's the time to talk about that level of details. We're at the 10,000 foot range today. I can't change. We're not at the detail. That you're gonna have, and that'll be a longer meeting than this one. They always are. But that's the detail meeting. Today's the 10,000-foot view to have possibilities. Thanks.
Any questions? More questions? I have a couple questions. I'm not familiar with, I've lived in an apartment for quite a few years. For example, at Integra, up by the dunes or whatever the name is on Cascade Road, one building, how many people would live in a building? Say 3, 4, 5 story building?
Yeah, it can depend on, every developer has a slightly different model. The developer of the multifamily that's currently interested in this site and under contract, subject to a lot of conditions down the road, builds 3-story, right? The comp plan change that I'm asking for here would actually allow up to 4 or 5. Why ask for 4 or 5 if we only need 3? We got an auto mall approved, right? We want that flexibility, and you know, there's advantages for accessibility and for fire safety and other things to stay at 3 or below. Construction costs are lower, accessibility is lower, life safety is easier. The only real main advantage of going up higher than that is more units on less dirt, right? Preserve more green space, use up less footprint. So who knows what might change down the road, if anything change, but it can depend, and that would be one of those conversations down the road. I believe 36 units per building is the max in what we have, so you'd be looking at 12, 13 unit configuration when we're talking about.
And what is how many buildings are on the Cascade or at Integra there?
I think there's 280-ish units.
So that's a relative comparison.
It's about the same size.
How much of the space, 36 acres, if this was proposed, if it was approved as proposed, with 300 apartments, 152 townhomes, laid out in some fashion, how much of that 36 acres would be left for other commercial development?
It depends a little bit, obviously, on how the site plan gets wiggled around. And and the townhomes, right? If they continue to be a part of the plan or not, and how many, that depends on the plan a little bit. So, you know, it really just depends on this.
The drawing makes it look to me like there's no land left for commercial use, very little. It's mostly all commercial use, full up commercial use, would be on the land side of the development.
So as of right now, what currently stands under the PD, the development agreement, is that the land side can have the convenience store, the restaurants, the retail, especially retail, the office. And the only thing that is permitted on the Lake Helen side at all is auto sales and related uses. It's the only thing at all. So one of the things you would see, now under the land use, right, it's very, very broad. Workplace, anywhere people work. But the zoning at a minimum is gonna have to be amended to allow commercial uses other than auto sales down the road. Unless it were changed to allow just a couple of surface lots, you know, your typical standard asphalt, you know, C of auto dealership. So it has to change anyway. And I think presumably what you do is you allow the same uses that are allowed on the land side and the Lake Helen side, plus the possibility of the residential. So if it can be configured down the road to that PD phase where, well, maybe you can move these buildings around a little bit, maybe you can put more units in a building to create a little more space, you can slide one of those commercial out parcels over into the Lake Helen side, so it's got an out parcel. But I would, from an economic standpoint, right, I would rely on your economic advisors to tell you what are you actually getting more tax base out of per acre on that type of commercial out parcel that far away from frontage road and the access versus putting 20 apartment units on. Because you look at that, what they've estimated in there, the taxable value per unit, I think they use a number of about $175,000 per unit. And that's based on what the tax rules say now about the style of apartments, right? So if you're talking about a 36 unit building, 36 times 175, it's a pretty big number. I mean, even the hot corners of like a frontage of an Orange Camp Where you're gonna get the maximum amount of dollars per acre. Nathan, it's maybe $1 million for an end user, per acre. And it drops dramatically the farther you go away from frontage road. When you take that horse camp turn, that first one, that's the highest dollar value. Every foot you gotta drive beyond that, it goes down. That's just the reality of commercial real estate. So if you're talking about getting it all the way back over there, it would have to be a balancing act at that point, I think, to say, well, what are we really better off tax-wise?
So I did not see in what was provided to us, traffic impact, and so we based upon just anecdotal information. How would the, let's use the example of the automobile, fully built out like it was originally planned, the traffic from that versus traffic count for what's proposed here? Is it all the same, apartments are more or less?
With the apartments and the townhomes combined, I believe the traffic count is less than half. That's just, engineers that are paid to do nothing but traffic studies. Typically, it's about, I believe, 50,000 square feet of retail equals 500 dwelling units, I want to say, and that could be wrong, but it's, we ran those numbers. That's one of the very first things we did, right? We're not going to waste time going out and getting contracts under property and everything if we know the traffic counts. It's one of the most basic elemental foundations of looking at whether or not a development is feasible. It's considerably less. And again, that has to come back in front of you before anything ever gets built. You can't, obviously you're not gonna take our word for it. There's rules about that. We gotta provide an updated traffic study.
And as proposed right now, the townhomes will be effectively single-family homes as townhomes, but they're single-family homes, owner-occupied or owner, they're not rentals.
Correct, they're not rentals, they would be for sale. Pretty good. The comment was you can't stop people from renting them out. That's true. Well, you can. But
The reason why I asked that question is I did not see in the financial, the Save Our Homes Amendment, they threw in a number. Well, here's how homestead exemption will affect this, but they did not put in the Save Our Homes Amendment provision. So owner-occupied townhome is gonna, over time, bring us less and less tax revenue, right, for one tax.
it is not only possible, it's certain and inevitable, and that was reflected in the James Moore study that the city had done too. It took that into account.
Got that a second. Are there other
I
questions?
have a question. I've noticed on the sign, the sale sign on front of the property, that it says under contract. So obviously there's a developer involved, contingent on whatever happens. What is to stop the developer from going with low-income housing down the road, right away, whatever? What if half of those apartments become federally funded? That's out of the tax base.
Well, I can tell you a couple things, and then I'm sure your city attorney will probably weigh into. One, the developer under contract just doesn't build those. But two, it is really, really illegal to put any kind of a requirement in any zoning or land use that says you can't have low-income housing or can't have affordable housing, can't have tax-sensitive housing. Highly illegal. So to answer your question, never on any project ever is it possible to make sure that will happen.
Correct, but you can't take into consideration then the taxes that will be generated, because if your low-income housing cuts a good chunk out of that tax base, the taxes are only based on the actual.
Well, I would let your economic advisors weigh in on that, but just because there's housing is subsidized doesn't mean it doesn't generate tax revenue and property tax revenue. The ad valorem tax revenue is based on the value of the property, regardless of who lives there or anything else. Property has a certain value and it's taxed accordingly. So there's going to be tax base there regardless of what kind of housing it is. But I would let your city consultants, weigh in on that.
So what I hear you saying is that if we allow this density to be approved, we are welcoming an opportunity for low-income housing to be placed there eventually. And I'm not sure, you might know the answer to this question as a developer. When apartments are built, what is their lifespan, generally speaking, as high-end apartments, and then they become low-income housing? What is the stat on that? Do you have a guess?
Well, I'll say
5 years?
two things first.
Okay.
Are you welcoming low-income housing if you approve this? Any zoning category that allows apartments anywhere in any city, county, or state in the United States of America cannot discriminate against people based on race, income, or religion in the Fair Housing Act. And so any place, including all of your zoning in Lake Helen that already allows for apartments, there's the possibility for it to be fair housing. There's a possibility in the most high-end apartment complex ever built at $4,000 a month, $8,000 a month, $12,000 a month, to require a certain allocation to be dedicated over and set aside. And so you get a very nice building, right? And I think what some cities and counties kind of believe is that by doing that up front, right, it's almost counterintuitive. It's like the grocery store thing that takes strips off from you. I think one of the things that they find is that, well, if we say from the beginning, you gotta have 10. I understand, but we need 10. That's all it's gonna be, as opposed to this might be a project. Personally, percentages, I have no idea. I've never seen a stat, anything like it. I don't recall, just personally, and maybe I've just been in a bubble somehow, but I cannot think of one at all. I will tell you what I have heard about when I talk about this project or others in this area. When I say we're talking about an apartment project and somebody says, well, I don't want to see government housing, I want to see something nice. And I say, well, what would you tell, what looks nice? What looks nice to you? Tell me an example of one around here that you think looks nice. And a lot of people say, well, the one that's right by the Circle K in the corner of Woodland and Taylor, that's a nice looking apartment building. Great, that's Section 8 housing.
Thank you for making my point. My second question is, as far as the traffic.
I would ask this too, who are you afraid might move in?
I am not, I mean, that was just my question. I don't live in apartments, but what I.
You were basically
Very-
on
very-
tax revenue, and not discriminating.
Excuse me. I was simply trying to get information from you as a developer to see how long these apartment complexes will look nice. It really doesn't matter if they're Section 8 or not, but what I'm saying, but what you just informed us of is that when we change the comp plan, we are then opening a door to that, and I'm not.
But the door that's already open in all your zoning that allows multifamily housing on this
But
side.
not at this point, but we don't have this density. Okay, so my second question.
And also,
My
the
second
land
question.
development code applies to this building just like it does any
I
other.
understand that. My second question is, with your traffic analysis, or you say that this would be a step down in traffic, and I believe you when you say that. However, when traffic is coming to commercial places only, even if it's more, it doesn't change the voter rolls. It doesn't change the character of the city. So it doesn't overpopulate our schools, and these people are not here to go to work in the morning from this location, drop their kids off at school, and add to our already traffic problem in Lake Helen. So I think with full disclosure, a commercial developed piece of property rather than high-density residential would be more traffic favorable. And even if there are more cars during the day, They're not dropping their kids off at school, and they're not going to the grocery store. So that's just my take. Just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah, and the traffic studies, part of their breakdown is AM peak trips, PM peak trips, afternoon trips. You're 100% correct. There's a different distribution of trips per day. There's a higher peak AM, higher peak PM, because presumably people go to work around 8 or 9 in the morning, come home around 5 PM. So there is a difference in peak trips. And it's different for different industries, right? So the auto mall has a different peak generation rate than a restaurant or a doctor's office, or some
And I
other
welcome-
uses too. And so they do break that down in there, and you would see that breakdown. But again, right now, all I can tell you is, the traffic study is required. We usually are the ones that pick the traffic engineer, but anybody can pick it. They all use the same book and what's the calculations. And they'll have to update that, and that's certainly something that down the road would be a consideration, no matter what we change. Because the change from auto mall to anything is going to require an updated traffic study. Typically what we do in most projects, and the cities do it, most counties do it, is there's a trip equivalency matrix built into it. That basically says, here's the number of trips you can have. Here's all the different kind of usage that you have allowed in the project. But we don't know, for example, if it's going to be a hotel building, or take the top left corner of the project, it could be currently either hotel or office. Those have different trip rates, right? There may never be a hotel in this distribution.
It still won't change the character of our city.
Right, so in your question, and I think it's probably worth studying, and if it's something that, planning commission or ultimately the city commission wants us to bring back as part of a subsequent hearing, what are the percentages of voter turnout rates in multifamily versus townhome? Because they are different in multifamily, townhome, and single family. Just statistically, you have a different percentage of turnout. That would be something I'm sure to consider. I would want to consider it if I were a resident of Lake Elmo, the planning commission, or the city commission. And then the other component of that is what would that have a practical effect procedurally? Because I believe you all in your city commissions are split up by districts geographically, correct? And then the mayor's citywide. So probably what you end up having is that if you have a maximum build out, which again, is probably unlikely, if you have a maximum build out, you project about 1,000 people. They're not all going to be voting age, number one, right? So let's say you've got 700 voters, you go with the percentages down there. It probably ends up being its own district, in redistricting. You probably end up having a Western I-4 voting district as a result of change like this. So it probably affects one district and the at-large race, and not, well, the other ones would get redrawn, basically.
Correct, and typically people who live in apartments and smaller townhomes that are next to apartments, which will devalue the proposed townhomes, are transient type people who don't invest in Lake Helen long term. So this is these are the many things that we have to consider that have not been brought up at this meeting. So, and I understand it's not what we're voting on tonight.
The one thing I'd say about the voting is we have districts, but everybody runs at large. So you're not voted in by district. You represent a district, you live in a district, it's citywide voting for every district.
Understand?
So it won't be a situation where area wants to buy four will vote for their own representative. They vote for, everybody votes for everyone, but somebody would just have to live in that district.
That's how they call it.
People nominated to live in one district.
You have to live in the district, but then you have to vote, everybody has to vote.
Mr. Dillon, there's a statement in the economic report that says that the estimate, I guess, the population increase would be nearly 1,000 people, 994 residents of this fully built out according to the standard that they use. Are you in agreement with that number? If it was built out fully?
Yeah, I mean, they pulled from kind of standard actuarial type of chart, the equivalent of that type of chart, to say if you've got 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, how many people live there on average? And I think it's, 2.3 people or something like that.
So that's about a 40% increase in our population.
Yeah. It would be, and I don't know what they've written. Now, another thing, and I know the public doesn't always understand this, but, not at this phase, but when you go to the phase of the development agreement, when you're actually going to apply for, okay, well, actually, how many units can get built up to that cap? one of the things we have to do at that point is go to the school district and get certification from capacity. And no project gets approved if there's no certification of capacity without the investment. That happens on every single project that's residential unless it's 55 or over.
Would the developer be open to the idea that townhouses must be fee simple, owned by individuals or corporations, not rentals, not a rental? Because that's the new concept is you put up, 152 townhouses and they're all rentals. You run it like an apartment building, but it's actually rentals.
Yeah, so, the pros and cons, yes, I mean, I think that's certainly something that,
And would that come in the next step, it's the zoning?
that would be at the next step, and similar to, I think already in our kind of draft proposal is that it has to have an owners association. So I think the next step is that has to be one of the covenants in the owners association. And beyond that, there may be the ability to do a, true deed restriction that can't be amended down the road. Although these days, it's almost impossible to amend the owner association covenants because nobody ever gets a proxy vote.
Any further questions from the ward? Attorney Dillon?
The only thing I got to say is if somebody's read this or saw this, this is a development that they approved in Deltona over here on Catalina Drive for rental homes. Everything in there is rental. There's no such thing as buying anything. The outfits out of Miami, they got approval, I was reading the paper and stuff. So I'll just put it this way, they're getting closer and closer. That's a long.
Actually, the project is approved on Emerald County, near Casadega Road, that is gonna be built to rent, and it's a combination of different, like quadplexes, duplexes, standalone single-family homes, so it looks like kind of a cottage community, but they are all built to rent. So you get more of a neighborhood feel, less of an apartment feel, but it's a rental.
I'm just saying it's getting closer.
Which, this is just a general statement, it's just the reality of Volusia County wide, I think a lot of times have this problem. We all agree, I think every city agrees, community leaders agree, there is desperately a shortage of rental, not government housing, right? There's that's a different category, there's a shortage of that too. But there's also a shortage of true market rate housing. The rental rates on single family homes are ridiculous. You see a home that's only worth $110,000 and it's $2,200 a month to rent.
2,350.
And it's supply and demand, right? The supply comes up, the price goes down.
And I have one more question, if you're done cooking, I'm sorry.
That's all right, just.
I have one more question, and we're not at this stage yet. However, I am curious, with all of the land that the land has and all of the commercial income that the land gets, and Lake Helen not having land to develop commercial in our whole downtown burned years and years ago, the one thing that we were counting on is this commercial area to help relieve some of the tax pressures that we have to impose on our citizens. Why would you not put all of the commercial on Lake Helen's side, just out of respect?
Well, who should pay for it? Because here's the problem, it's not us who decides what the retailers and the restaurants and the gas stations want, or what they'll pay for, or where they'll locate.
See, to us, it just looks like a picture flip.
And the reality is, well, here's the reality.
You want us to change the comp plan like that, but to us, this just looks like a picture flip, so.
We cannot change the location of frontage road. Cannot, impossible, not our choice. Our choice was to have the main entrance to the property be where existing Stewart Road is. That's what we wanted. That's what we spent 6 months of delay. The project didn't move forward for 6 months. This goes back into 2016 and 2017, fighting and arguing with the DOT. Everybody else was kind of on our side about it. DOT said, absolutely not, never, it's not gonna happen. The limited access line is actually just barely east of where it shows frontage road. We can move frontage road over like 17 feet. But it wouldn't do any good. I mean, that wouldn't make a difference. So frontage road, where you see that curve that comes up, and originally what it was intended to do back in 2000 is, and that's owned in fee simple by FDOT. They started acquiring segments of road from Summit all the way down to Saxon. And originally, the plan, the county's plan and DOT's plan is this would be an I-4 relief road. It would run from Summit to Saxon. Phase one would be Summit to Orange Camp, then Orange Camp to 472, and then eventually 472 to Saxon. Or possibly tie into the Veterans Memorial extension when they got it. So that was the original plan, and this was the first step. They bought it, there was a deal between the Ford family and DOT, and then across the street, a deal between the Stewart family. And actually part of the Stewart family's deal, and you'll notice when you drive by there right now, it's actually paved. It's a road to nowhere right now. So on this side, on the south side of the road, you got a little bit of a road to nowhere because it's part of the taking, the government taking the eminent domain deal back then when FDOT took this. That wasn't part of the deal on this side, but it was on the south side. Is that when they finally widened the road, they would pave out and stuff out. So that's why that part of the road is paved. The original plan is for that road to curve and it's hung to the line, 4-lane, minimum 50-mile-an-hour speed limit road, running right along the border of Victoria Gardens, up and then ultimately connecting to McKenzie and Summit, kind of make a connection. That was their plan. They spent 10 years and $20 million on it, and then 2 years later he said, never mind. So there's little segments when you go south along between Orange Camp and 472. There's these little segments that FDOT and the county owns that would have accommodated that line as of right now. Now, it makes really good sense, right? And the things, I bet you if we're here 10 years from now talking about some other development in this area, we'll probably be talking about, or it'll have already happened, when the Beersford extension makes it all the way over to Summit. Right? The true Beersford extension, not the little connection that just got made, but the true Beersford connection. That's when it'll really start making sense that this frontage road goes up and connects to all that also. And it's good traffic planning for a road that's inevitable. What we all know is that you can't just not build the roads to stop growth. It's gonna happen, right? You have to plan for roads. And so that was part of the plan that just got abandoned and then the crash happened in 2004. But we can't change that. To answer your question, if we could, and that goes back to what I mentioned before too, right? This is 50 acres. The overall PUD is 50 acres. That, it looks small kind of on this map right here. 50 acres is twice the size of the public center up in Orange Camp and Wood. Now, it's 25, and then there's an extra 8. The Chick-fil-A side of the street is like an extra 8, with the hotel and storage facility, Chick-fil-A, there's an extra 8 acres over there, a lot of stormwater. But that, from the road where Chick-fil-A is on to Orange Camp, that whole public development is 25 acres.
I don't know if anybody recalls way back in Victoria Park was a dream, and they came and they threw meetings, and they promised the city of Lake Helen that we were going to be able to develop this commercial piece of property that we have sitting out there on I-4, and was gonna bring us all kinds of money, and Victoria Park promised us all the stars and the moon and the sun. And it never happened. It didn't happen. And here we are again now, being promised the stars and the moon and the sun. But what's going to happen? What is the impact to our town with 1,000 people coming over I-4? 10, 15% of them, 20% of them, everybody hitting for that so they can go that way. Or everybody trying to get onto I-4. I mean, we have to consider the citizens of this town and what they want. Maybe economically, it's not 100% what it should be, but the land development plan and the regulations say that the intention is to preserve the existing quality of life that is afforded to the city of Lake Helen residents and visitors, and to preserve the small town charm, honor, and build upon the city's historical heritage. I'm sorry, I know that Mr. Hill has invested all kinds of money, it's crazy money, but build a hotel, build a restaurant, build something. Don't bring us 1,000 residents that we don't have the infrastructure to support right now. And you can't tell them to stay over there. You can't come over here during the day. You have to have a pass to get over the bridge. You know, really.
Well, I can tell you that, and I get it, I understand that sentiment. I can tell you this, if there was a hotelier willing to build a hotel there right now, it would be built. Because there's an entitlement in that top left corner for a hotel. And it's not built, because there's no road to get there and there's no utilities going there. There's been entitlements since 2000 to build up to 300 hotel rooms in Lake Helen, in the employment center. But it's not built because there's no road, there's no utilities to get there. This is the gateway to your employment.
Attorney Dillon, let me ask you a question. This area here, that Victoria Garden, is this all built out?
Yes.
These houses come right up
Yes,
here.
right up to there.
Yes.
Yes.
So they have no choice but to use this.
And when they bought their home, there was already an entitlement for an 80-foot tall sea of buildings with 774,000 square feet of commercial use. Right next to it. This is, so from the closest point of the closest house that's shown there, now there's some stuff that's a lot closer to the land edge, it's down by Orange County. But the closest stuff there is about 700 feet to this project, and about 500 feet to where the extension of frontage road would go if it continued beyond this project. So it's actually closer to the old existing employment center than it is to this. And actually, that one section is like 13 homes that were carved out of some of the most densely treed kind of wildlife area.
Does the board have any more questions for Attorney Dillon? Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Hurley? That's good. We will take comments. I have a list of them here, starting with Todd Parsons. Todd, still here? Oh, okay. We have time, more time.
Good evening. I just have a prepared statement here. I tried, I had to get it down to 3 minutes, but I couldn't do it. It's going to be about 3 minutes and 38 seconds. So if you would kindly afford me that time, I would appreciate it. Thank you. So here we go. Good evening. I'm Todd Preston. I reside at 352 Connecticut Avenue. Lake Helen's comprehensive plan is a constitution-like document that provides a vision and a roadmap of where we are as a city, where we're going, and how to get there. The comprehensive plan is solid, but not completely resolute. It has great vision and good ideas, but within it, there's also a conflict. Conflict means that sometimes it's okay to change that plan, to resolve that conflict, or sometimes to adapt to changing times in order to continue on the road to a great destination. Tonight's consideration exposes an identifiable conflict and a proposed resolution that could not only clear that conflict, but that could also benefit the city economically and continue us on the road to our future vision. The comprehensive plan's primary concern is the growth of our city, and in fact, the entire plan focuses on our growth. We want to grow responsibly, but we want to do so within established laws. The laws say we must take into consideration affordable housing, among other things. In doing so, the comp plan identifies multifamily housing as a primary objective in achieving affordable housing. In fact, Chapter 4 housing element specifically states the city will ensure housing opportunities by allowing varied types of housing, including but not limited to single-family, multifamily homes. Well, we already have single-family homes. But are you aware there are no zoning classifications in the comp plan that allow for multifamily housing. Therein lies the conflict. The city has no accommodations for multifamily housing in the comp plan. If the city continues to reserve residential development of single-family homes, they're allowing the window of opportunity to open for the unintended consequence of being in violation of the law and getting sued by someone that will want to force their hand and allow them to build multifamily homes, presumably near the cultural center of the town, where its most prized asset lies, its rural small-town charm. By allowing this proposed amendment, you would be meeting the requirements of a strong mandate of the comp plan by allowing multifamily housing, which is called for in that plan, and which would be at the outskirts of town, far away from the rural hometown center, and would simultaneously head off at the pass any future legal challenges by someone forcing your hand by law. When someone comes before you in the future, and they will, and they say, you have to let me build multifamily homes and I want them here downtown, you can tell them no. We already have multifamily housing stock in the city and it's in this section over here. Again, I reiterate, the comprehensive plan has no zoning classifications for multifamily housing. That puts the comp plan in direct conflict with itself. And here before you tonight is an opportunity to permanently rectify that conflict. This project would be an economic boon for the city while maintaining and preserving its core downtown rural residential character and small town charm, and would cement the city's resolve in facing future challenges to it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. I give a few extra seconds there as a former member of the board. Carrie Marshall. And these names are random.
I'm Kerry Marshall. I live in Victoria Gardens. I'm here to ask the PLDRC to not approve this proposal. And I'm asking you for sending a recommendation forward to your city commission to also not approve it. Why not make a change? Well, it's been stated many times that if you change the plan, that is the first step to changing the zoning. And if you change the zoning, I'm going to offer to you, you're opening the door for high-density residential development. It's might be on the other side of the interstate, but it's in your city limits. The high-density development that's proposed for the red area there is going to yield approximately 1,000 people. You're the planning commission. You have to assume that. And I have heard two lawyers, in my words, say there's no way that that green stuff could become residential. And then I heard them say, well, it would be harder, these are my words, to become residential. And then I heard them say, well, but you just have to get everybody to sign off on it. You need to plan for the fact that that could possibly become high-density residential development in your city limits. If you've got 1,000 people there, and for just round numbers, you get the same kind of plan up in the green, you could wind up with 2,000 or 3,000 new cities in the city of Lake Helen, with Jim, Florida. They don't care about you have a bond issue that you're looking at. You got some freshwater delivery problems. You got storm management problems. You got wastewater problems. If I lived in either of those places, first of all, in the red, I got a pool that on a map looks like it's about as big as half of an apartment. I got no park. I got nothing. I want you people to vote a bond and pay for that. If I live up in the green section, I got one problem. I'm sick and tired of listening to that interstate. I want you to float a bond, and I want a 12-foot tall concrete barrier with steel girders to protect me from the sound of that interstate. And I'm your citizen, and I demand that you do that. And since you guys are all elected across the city, we might just vote you folks out of office and your city commissioners too, and we'll get somebody in there that will give us what we want. You need to plan for the long term, and I'm sorry to say this, but you need to plan for scenarios that might not be what you want. It costs you nothing to make no change. It costs you nothing to not approve this plan that's been brought before you and not change the comprehensive plan and not recommend zoning and high density development. It costs you nothing to do that. It costs the city of Lake Helen nothing to do that. What happens if you get 3,000 people up there? You lose control of your finances, you lose control of your strategic planning, you lose control possibly of everything. The developer has not brought you what you've been looking for. Well, I offer to you, changing the zoning and changing the plan isn't gonna solve that. Maybe you need a different developer. The developer has the right to sell his land and get what he can for it. And that will send a message to the community that maybe a developer ought to come and build what you want. Please don't change the plan, stay the course, it costs you nothing to stay where you are.
Thanks, Sherry Norris. Sherry Norris?
No, sir.
Order.
I'm Sherry Morrison, I'm from Lake Helen Villa, and I'm concerned about the addition of children coming to our public schools and the cost. Can our schools pay more? Would we have to add on the money that these apartments are going to give us? Are we just going to spend it over here with police protection, gathering more people, building on the school? That's what I'm concerned about.
Thank you, ma'am. Lynn Donato?
Good evening, I'm Linda Donato, and I live in Lake Helen Villas. And I've got to say, I feel like I'm in DC. We get a packet, we've got 15 minutes to read it, and we've got two sides that are just opposing each other. I think that the builder, or the representative of the builder, did a great job in trying to tear up what our contracted Stafford did in his report. I happen to agree with him. I've yet to see a builder who hasn't come out on top, unless they decide to start building in the middle of a recession. And right now, yeah, Florida, all of Florida needs a lot of housing. And the reason being is people are leaving California, they're coming from Jersey, they're coming from New York, and they're coming from across the border. Now, when we talk about low housing in Section 8, I don't care if it's at the city level, the county level, or federal level. Our dollars, tax dollars, are going in to help pay for Section 8 apartments and homes. It's just a fact. We here in Lake Helen just thought about on our, I think it was the waste management deal that almost fell through due to a clerical error. And we were looking at senior citizens, looking at having to put out almost $400 more a year to pay for the fire department or the waste management department. Our taxes are going up. The price of eggs definitely have gone up. And I think that commissioners and the planning board needs to take a look at, yeah, okay, so we're in debt. We know we are, but let's get, your sleeves rolled up and figure out how to get out of debt. I guess my 3 minutes is up.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Michelle Killian? Michelle? She's left us? Last chance, Michelle Killian? Sherry Norris? No?
No, I think my questions was answered on that second.
Oh, you were here to talk, okay, you actually. Tim Taylor?
Yes, my name is Tim Taylor. I am a Victoria Park resident. I've been there for about 2.5 years. If you look at where the red mark is, right above that, the little finger thing, that's a lake. And I live right on that lake. So any development back there is going to affect our view. I was promised when we bought the house that view would always be there, the trees would not come down. You know, I think there might be 2 or 3 trees left along a little edge there, but the rest of it might come down. I travel out of that development every morning to go to work. I'm not retired, I still work every day in Longwood. And adding 1,000 people coming out of that development every morning is going to be overtaxing. Also, the road across I-4 that goes to Lake Helen is only 2 lanes, 1 each direction. You have 1 fender bender or anything on that bridge, and you're backed up all the way to the roundabout. It's already very traffic intensive. And I understand if it's commercial, there will be a lot of traffic, but it's not all packed in 2 times a day, in the morning and in the evening. Right now, it's everybody's coming out in the morning, but there's just enough coming out that it's not overbearing. The other thing is the wildlife out there. Right at the end of that pond, I've got a couple of trail cameras. I've seen deer, bear with cubs. I've seen bobcats, river otters, and there's a bald eagle that's flying around out there all the time. He might be nesting in there. And if that happens, I don't think you can build anything if a bald eagle nests. I think that's state law. I may be wrong, but I think it's state law if a bald eagle nests in there. So I hate to see the wildlife go. I understand that could happen if it becomes commercial, but I think your biggest problem is going to be traffic and all the kids coming to the school and maybe not enough tax base to handle. Thank you very much.
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Give you an extra few seconds.
Sure.
Are you talking about this lake up here?
No, just above the red,
Right above the grid.
section that sticks out, no, to the left, see that right there, that's our lake. I live right on that lake. And the trees are supposed to stay, that curved area is actually gonna be a road, then it's only gonna be 50 feet from the back of my lake. And they're gonna take the trees down to the side of the road, so it'll all be gone.
Tim, explain the 2-acre parcel of land on this. Let him point to it.
Yeah, the little square, the little triangle right there above, to the left of the white ground, yes, that is actually owned by the city of DeLand. And they're gonna have to give compensation or dispensation, whatever, if you actually build that road through there, they're gonna have to approve it.
Well, that's their plan though, that's why they bought it, for that road.
Right. So anyway, I hate to see the area change. Have any of you on the board ever been to that area and physically walked around over there? A lot of it is swamp. It is gonna be very hard to build in there. And from our pond, it runs downhill all the way to I-4. And during the last hurricane, when everything was getting flooded, we didn't get flooded because we had good drainage. If you suddenly build a bunch of buildings down there and other retention ponds, they could either drain our pond and dry area, or if our pond can't drain well, it'll flood all of our homes. Because it is already very low. That entire Lake Green Neck section is literally a lake with a little bit of grass on top. It's gonna be extremely hard to ever develop. So it's ambitious that you want to turn that into anything, but I really would hate to see us flood and lose all the wildlife, so. Thanks, sir.
You know the only thing that saves you?
I'm sorry?
You know what saves you?
No,
The wetlands on this property that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's what saves you.
I know, and if you're talking about paving over all that wetland there, and you could have really bad flooding problems in Victoria Park. And I don't think anybody wants that, so. Thanks, sir.
Lynn Donato. I think I called her. Did I already call Lynn Donato?
Yes.
Okay. Even though there's not a card, does anybody else have a comment that they'd like to make and come to the podium? Joe?
Yeah.
We'll give you a break since you were the chair of the board just recently.
Johanna, 155 North Lakeview Drive. It's real simple. Just say no.
Attorney General. Response.
Real quick, man, again, 3 minutes.
Order, please.
I want to come back to where we're at procedurally. Right? Procedurally, where a land use change, comp plan change, to make some conversations possible, right? Conversations like the red part that sticks out to the top left, that originally, and as it's currently entitled, that part was for the distribution center, right? So there was going to be a unified place where the car carriers come in, unload cars, unload parts, parts depot, they can distribute it all to the different dealerships. That's the reason for that bump out, so that all the auto-related uses stayed in Lake County. That's the reason it becomes like that. At this stage, we can't have the conversation because engineering and real planning and layout hasn't been done because there's no residential allowed to consider multi-use development. But if we move to that next phase, we can have those kind of conversations about, hey, you know what? The Lake Helen line comes a little bit west of Stewart Road. We want to see some out parcels along Orange Camp. Where we want to see, you're telling me that they won't drive off the frontage road? Fine. Let's push the residential off the frontage road. Let's not let townhomes go right there. Let's make that leasing commercial. Those are conversations you never get the benefit of having, right? So the important part, again, what we're here to talk about is a very small first step. This is not approving a project or a plan or anything you can build. This is an opportunity to have conversations that you are 100% right. It will change some things like that. There will be more people that live here. Right? The school board will have to approve whether or not there's school capacity. The engineers will have to approve whether or not there's road capacity. I'll have to show you that I'm not just saying there'll be less traffic. We'll have to prove it with the reports. But none of those conversations can happen, right? And I get it. I like bunnies and bears too, right? And there's a good reason they're right behind his house. They used to live where his house is now, along with the other 4,000 houses in Victoria, including mine, and my cousins, and my in-laws, and my brother-in-laws. Right? I live there too. Right? Nothing has impacted the wildlife and the traffic in the greater DeLand, Lake Helen area more than Victoria Park. That's why it's called the development of regional impact, right? Not just a subdivision. And these are the kind of things that were fully expected to happen. Again, that what if something happens behind us? That extension of that road has been planned for 20 years before that house was built, in exactly the location it's proposed to be built now. It's been there the whole time. And if somebody lied and said it had never been built back there, I mean, it's on the Victoria Park literature shown. It's on the plan for Victoria Park. It's in the documents. So I get it. Change is hard. We'd all rather have fields behind us than anything else. But what we have right now is an entitled piece of property to the north that'll never be built until this is, because this is the gateway. And we can't even have those conversations. The economic study that your commission spent money to have done to say, is this something we should even talk about, came back and said, well, if you want to possibly have a net $500,000 a year in revenue, then yeah, it's something you should probably at least talk about. And so that's what we're asking for tonight, is a recommendation of approval not to approve the project, not to build anything. Nothing can be built with a recommendation of approval. Nothing can be shut down with a recommendation of denial. It'll move on to the next phase, where we would like to have that conversation, give the citizens of Lake Helen the opportunity through their elected officials to decide whether or not the pros outweigh the cons. And they might say they don't, and they might vote no. That's okay. It's a legislative duty to make a decision. That's okay. But it's important to remember what we are doing here today and what we're not doing. This is a small text amendment to allow the conversation. Thanks.
Any comments from the board? Additional comments, staff?
I'd like to make just a couple comments, Mr. Chairman. First of all, the application that we received about a year ago, the one that had a $700 check in it, which we did cash, also came with a traffic study dated in 2018 for the auto mall. We said that this is not acceptable, and we still had not received the traffic study for the project. Hence the delay. A meeting was referenced in April, and the inference seemed to be that the commission was simply waiting to be able to take this one step further I will tell you that December 5th, about a month and a half ago, the commission agreed to meet with Mr. Hurley in the workshop session. At that time, Mr. Hurley's calculations indicated in the first 2 years, we would receive $2 million in funds we could use for roads and water main reconstruction, all that good stuff. Because of that, the commission wanted to know what we thought as the staff at that particular state group. That's the reason we gave not 15,000, we gave 10,000 to our auditing firm, so they could come up with the financial statements that you heard today. That particular statement, or financial statement, I will tell you, because of the uncertainties of any development, and particularly this one, really is ultimately going to be worthless, because we have no idea how things go. We certainly know it's not going to be $2 million yet, and quite frankly, with Save Our Homes, which applies only to residential property, and a recession that everybody's talking about coming, if it does come, have a devastating effect on the ad valorem tax revenue. And there's one thing I would call your attention. Back in November of last year, 22, there was a ballot amendment on the general ballot in the state of Florida to grant an additional $50,000 exemption for individuals who were, I'll read them to you. Classroom teachers, law enforcement officers, correctional officers, firefighters, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, child welfare services professionals, active duty members of the United States Armed Forces, and Florida National Guard members. Any of those individuals employed in those categories would be entitled to an additional $50,000 exemption on the real estate. Again, only applies to residentially used property. That particular amendment failed by 1.5%. It needed 60%, it got 58.3%. Undoubtedly, we'll see it again. Florida League of Cities estimated that would cost cities in Florida 40% of their ad valorem tax. That would be very dangerous for us. We are not wealthy, we're not poor, but 40% of our ad valorem tax would cause severe difficulties for us. Those provisions, Save Our Homes, and the one I mentioned to you, do not apply to commercial properties. Commercial properties are unaffected by those activities. So one of the reasons, and just one of the reasons why this city, I think, is very fortunate to have the EC zone they have. It is, in my opinion, even though something may not be built there for years yet, it is a fantastic opportunity for us to stabilize our revenue from ad valorem taxes from just almost 100% residential to residential and commercial. I think that's probably all I need to correct.
Mr. John, I'd like to respond.
Well,
Let's give fair opportunity to Mr. Hurley.
First of all, there's no requirement to submit an updated traffic study right now. I submitted the one that's approved, and the draft development agreement states to be updated. But you don't go spend another $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to have a traffic study updated when the land use doesn't even allow the use that we're submitting. It's not a huge endeavor to update the traffic study, but it's premature. And until we appealed to the mayor, to Mayor Lane, to get a meeting together and make everybody sit down in the same room for a year and a half, this is how it usually works. And I know a lot of people think that people meet in smoky rooms with commissioners and grease pockets according to social media. It's a lot more boring in the life of a land use attorney than that, I can guarantee you. But the way things happen is when you're going to apply for a change like this, almost every city, including this one, you have a pre-app meeting, pre-application. You go sit down with city staff. You say, this is what we're thinking about doing. Not only did we do that, we went to a commission workshop in April 21 and said, hey, full commission, rather than just staff, since you don't really have a planning department, let's go to the commission and say, do you want to talk about this? The answer was yes, we want to talk about this, right? We didn't get a meeting in person for over a year. I documented a lot of this up to a certain point of time in the letter, right? A very long time, constant, well, we lost it, oh, they withdrew the application. Or I got a call from the Land City officials a couple weeks ago that said, hey, I'm doing my beginning of the year report. Why didn't you guys tell us the Lake Helen project was dead? I said, what are you talking about? It's dead. Yeah. Michael Boyce ran into Lee at a meeting and he told him it's dead. Dead on arrival, not gonna happen. There's no application. We've heard that repeatedly in different meetings, that our application was withdrawn. It's nonsense. It's not true. It's never been true. I've never been in a position where I have to sit up here and say something like this about any professional in any city, but I'm not gonna sit here and let another blatant mystery be repeated. It's not true. And the email correspondence speaks for itself along the way. So I'm not gonna let that happen. You can vote no, of course, right? It's your prerogative to do so. But you deserve the facts as the appointed planning commission. The city commission deserves the facts. It's not the president of Lake Helen, it's the city administrator. It's not the dictator or the czar. His job is to process the paperwork and put it in front of you and put it in front of the city commission, not to make decisions on his own and not to decide what the city commission should do and not even give him a chance to vote. That's not his job. And that's why he was fired after 2 years unanimously in another city for being stubborn and not reporting to the commission. I'm sorry for getting fired up and losing my temper, but I won't be told that I don't know how to submit a traffic study because it's not true. One of us might not know how to do their job, but it's not me.
I think we agree to disagree.
That's a good way to do it. Mr. Hurley. And folks, I please ask for your patience. I think it's only fair to allow Mr. Hurley as a landowner to hear, discuss this tonight, to let him speak.
Okay, my name is Brendan Hurley. I'm the misfortunate owner of this property for 7 years now. And the reason I came to Lake Helen to begin with this project was because I felt that the city of Lake Helen was proximate, it was close, it was right across I-4, it made sense. And also the administrator at the time, unlike our current incompetent administrator, was capable of listening and understanding how the project would work. And unfortunately, disastrously, COVID came along, and one by one, all of my contracts fell through. Every single one of them. It was a disaster. There's no single person in this room that would want that automall to be built today other than me. We had the concept, we called it the 2020 concept, the 2020 vision. We should have been operational sometime in 2020, under construction, and guess what? Asbury pulled out, Lithia pulled out, one right after the other they pulled out. So I hired an expert firm, an internationally acclaimed real estate firm to market this property for me everywhere, all the way to Dubai, and anybody in between that would buy this property. And we have not been successful with any type of buyer other than multi-family. And I want to address what Lee said, another one of his lies, where he said that I misrepresented the financial study. I included impact fees on that $2 million, and if you look at the study in front of you, you will see that that is exactly the number that's on there. Now, the impact fees can only be drawn upon when there's impact. So if Lake Helen decides to redo the city hall, it can withdraw from those impact fees. It's legitimate. The state of Florida governs how those impact fees can be distributed. It's legitimate if you want to improve your parks and your services and any services that would benefit the citizens of Lake Helen. Those massive impact fees, millions of dollars, less, by the way, my report was far less than the James Moore report when it comes to impact fees. They figured a considerably higher number than I did, despite what Lee might tell you. Another one of his fabrications and his delays. And I'm passionate about this because I'm the guy that's had to pay the bill, and I'm one of the largest taxpayers in Lake Helen, I might add. And I'm paying his $170,000 a year salary. Who else in Lake Helen is making $170,000 a year? Not me. I'm losing that in a month. So my passionate plea to you all is just allow the door to get open so that the hearings that need to be heard can be heard. It doesn't mean that anything is being approved tonight. All it means is that you're opening the door for further discussion. And let me tell you, $500,000 a year in 3 years and 150, 230, 410, That's a huge amount of money for Lake Helen, and I keep hearing, well, we much prefer to have commercial. Well, I've done the math, and I just did it on my phone. If you put 4 restaurants in there and a hotel, you would get less revenue ad valorem than you would from the single multifamily building, not including the townhomes. And that's a fact, and it's also the James Moore report. We're talking about $90 million worth of ad valorem here, and that's taking away the $50,000 per townhome. $90 million. If you look at the total value of the ad valorem in Lake Helen, right now, the budget last year, we're within $200,000 of doubling that. So I don't know what math Lee is using, or maybe his calculator some stuck keys or something, or maybe he's just not knows how to use it, but the numbers speak for themselves. And what we should be complaining about with Lake Helen is, oh, my bag of gold is too heavy. That's what should be happening here. And I would plead with you not to get stuck in the weeds about, oh, this is not commercial. We'd rather have McDonald's, we'd rather have a Burger King, we'd rather have a ball bearing factory. I don't know. This actually will yield as much, if not more, and other benefits to boot. And I'm sorry, but I do think it's a good thing for people from there to come over to Lake Helen and do business in Lake Helen. I see nothing wrong with that concept. And maybe Lake Helen can build some restaurants downtown and have some nice characteristic things over there. Certainly with another $1,000 or 1,000 neighbors on your back porch, I think that would be a very nice thing. A very nice thing. And the quality, right, by the way, I want to address the company that I've got under contract with right now, his representative is here, Nathan Eisler, is an incredible company. They've done beautiful work throughout the state of Florida and in Daytona and around these areas. The quality of the product is tremendous. And my last closing remark is that today, multifamily serves the type of people who are not, I would say they're young, mobile professionals that are likely to want to change jobs and churn in a couple of years. They're less likely to buy a home because they don't want to get stuck with a home. They're more likely to rent than they are to buy, and there's a reason for that. And also younger people today have a difficult time qualifying for mortgages simply because of the interest rates and so forth. And despite Lee's comment, his myopic comment about the boom in real estate, he hasn't read the Wall Street Journal in a year, I don't think, because there is no boom in real estate. It's very challenging. There are deals falling backwards all the time, and I'm fearful that this is going to be one of them if something doesn't happen. And there isn't some indication of a possibility of it actually happening. So I thank you all, and I understand the passion that some people have, but I think this project is a far nicer project from an aesthetic standpoint, from a neighborhood standpoint, from every standpoint, than the Auto Mall ever would have been. Would I prefer the Auto Mall? Absolutely, because I would have had my Mazda dealership there, my Volkswagen dealership there. I would have been very, very happy. But it didn't happen, and I wish it had. But this is probably a better project. I thank you all. Sorry for being passionate.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Board? We have a motion? I have this question. Mr. Simpson, Attorney Simpson. Under the, our judicial discretion, I'm sorry, our legislative discretion, do we have to provide a reason?
No, I mean, you don't have to, because we don't have to have substantial competent evidence to support it. I mean, I think it would be good to explain, say.
For example, based upon the report that we plan.
You're given an advice, you're an advisory board, you're given a recommendation to the commission. It's helpful for you all to, in minutes, explain why your recommendation is what it is, so they can take that into consideration, just other than a yes or no. And it can be simply that, based on the discussion and the impact of residential, we prefer commercial, or the residential will be good, and we think it needs, the information that Todd put up there about low-income housing, that's very legitimate. That is part of the conference.
Thank you. Okay, someone want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we deny this one.
And do you want to provide a reason or?
Can we discuss?
Discuss it. Reason being the detriment to the city, the impact it's going to have on the city with the amount of people, the schools, a lot of the stuff I agree with, I heard from the people in the audience. So I move that we deny the request.
The second on that motion?
I'll second it.
Discussion.
I would like to, Mr. Hurley, I appreciate all of your patience, and I know this project has just been bleeding you, and I would like to see this, your project, whatever it ends up being, I would like to see this piece of property developed in a commercial fashion for the benefit of Lake Helen, and I understand this is what you just came up with now to present something. And I just want you to know, I do want a project to go forward, but perhaps not this particular one.
Well, I happen to never get another opportunity. And also, I do think that the roadway to the property to the north is a very big consideration. That property is never going to sell unless people parachute in there, because there's no road to it. This provides the road to it. And that is in the city charter, mentioned as one of the bright spots for Lake Helen. And it's not a bright spot right now because there is no way to get into it. There's no spot to get in there. And this project at least opens that possibility up. And if I could put commercial here, if I had a buyer that was wanting to put a commercial facility in there, I would. But frankly, the yield from the multifamily is greater than the yield would be from commercial.
I'm also a firm believer in there's always more than one solution to a problem.
Mr. Hurley, I have a statement to make, and I think you know that I'm being honest about it. I worked with you, I worked on that project so bad, but to be perfectly honest with you, not the project or nothing, but I've been in the excavator business for 60 years. Did a lot of apartments and everything else, and seen them come up and go down and everything else, but I'm a little shy on the apartment part. But I'm gonna tell you something, I'm 110% with you if we could get commercial, because that's, as a town official and everything else for all these years, that's all I worked for. So it's nothing personal, but I just would like to see a commercial project in there. That's all. I'm sorry.
I'd like to see it too, but just isn't there. You know?
Well, it isn't there now, maybe we need it tomorrow.
7 years.
What do you have as Mr. Farmer's motion?
A motion to deny ordinance 2023-02, or to recommend to the city commission that they deny it.
Deny. Do you want to say a specific reason or just leave it there? Just leave it there.
I think we have other reasons coming from the council there that everybody is expressing. I really would like to see a commercial myself for that. I do this every day of the week on my civilian job, and it can happen. It may not happen today, but it can happen down the road.
Okay, I'll just throw in my 2 cents is that I don't see a big difference between a apartment building and a commercial use of piece of property. There's very little difference in the ad valorem taxes that you're gonna get from those two uses of land. So we have to keep that in mind. Keep bringing up the fact that we're turning this over residential. But if you look at the two things, one is a commercial project, it's an apartment building, and one is a commercial building, it's a Walmart convenience store. They're still both effectively commercial, and they are not subject to the set-asides that would allow the owners to reduce their tax burden that would come to the city. So there's no homestead exemption, there's no Safer Homes Amendment, there's no additional homestead, widows exemption, disabled veterans exemptions, that's not available for apartment building owner. So I'd just like to throw that in there. And I guess we're ready to vote. Everybody said their piece? Now to, the motion on the table Dominique, you want to repeat the motion for us one more time?
Sure. Motion to recommend that the city commission deny ordinance 2023-02 made by Earl Farmer and seconded by Ann Lazar.
All right. Take a vote. We'll go backwards. Mr. Commissioner Farmer? You made the motion, so I'm assuming.
Deny.
No, you made the motion to deny.
So you're
approving.
You're approving, you're voting yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Feather? Commissioner Lane?
Approved.
Commissioner Secretary LaSigla? Anna?
I approve the motion.
You agree with the motion? And Cookie?
I approve.
Approve the motion. And my vote would be to, against the motion. So that is what, 42. That the denial will go to the city. That's what it is.
What's your vote?
You agree with the motion? I'm sorry. I'm no longer,
You're the name.
I'm no longer 5 minutes. I approve. Yes. I approve. We've made a motion to send it to the city commission to deny the request.
That's not how.
I voted against it. And then
You
the-
voted against the motion.
Do we have any further staff or commission discussion that we're aware of? Any closing remarks? Thank everybody for coming. See you at the commission meeting. You adjourn.